Okay. We are live and ready to begin. How's everyone doing out there on the Duran Live 49? If you can hear me, let me know in the chat. If you can see me, if you can see Peter Lavelle, if you can see Alexander Mercouris, let us know in the chat as well. It is great to be with everybody again. Let's see if everyone is getting our signal for this live stream. So let's hold on a second. Hello, Goran. How you doing? Valley S. Hey, Valley, how are you? I think you guys can hear me, right? Yeah, great. Yes, lads. All right, thank you, Nicholas. Dundee, Mark. Thank you, Mark. Okay. Let's get moving. We have a lot of news to discuss, everybody. And guys, we have the Horowitz report coming up today. And I've got a window open and I'll be keeping an eye out for that. Anyone in the live stream, if you guys get news on the Horowitz report, or if there's something to relay over to us and to the community, just shoot it into the chat and we'll try to address what's going down in the United States with the Ukraine impeachment hoax and the Russiagate hoax and Horowitz and Barr and all that stuff. We have a lot of stuff to break on that front, a lot of stuff, including another child pornographer by the name of Nader, who has been indicted by AG Barr. This is a really interesting story, really important story.
Also a character from the Mueller report.
There you go, and also someone who cut a deal with Mueller. Boy, oh boy. And of course, he's a Hillary Clinton donor.
That's a story in itself. They cut a deal with him. Amazing. They cut a deal. Go
figure. But before we get to that, let's introduce everybody here and people on the live stream, where you're joining us from. Introduce yourselves. Let us know where you're watching us as we wait for more people to join in. We have, of course, in Moscow, in his new flat. That's the English way of saying it, his new apartment, with an awesome bookcase in the back and really great lighting. Looks really nice. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk. Peter, how you doing?
Very well. I promised everyone this, and Mercouris, you're on. Okay, my books are arriving in a week. Okay.
Well, there you go.
No,
Awesome.
We are a very literary podcast. Okay, very much. I'm great. Finally, winter is very mild here. So far, so much news to keep up with. To be really honest with you, I feel like I'm being pulled into this impeachment vortex, which I really don't like. Okay, because there's so many other things going on. We need to talk about what's going on in North Korea. It's very important. It doesn't make the mainstream at all. We got so much to talk about.
We got a lot to talk about, absolutely. And we have in London, the Oracle of London, Mr. Alexander Mercouris, with his famous bookshelf in the background. Alexander, how are you?
Well, famous, but soon to be exceeded in splendor.
Well, probably not exceeded, but
I mean, as Peter rightly says, it's been there for a long time, so it's beginning to develop cobwebs, I suppose. But there we go. But no, seriously, Peter, yours looks absolutely marvelous. I'm green with envy. But here in London, it's a bright, sunny day. And we're in the middle of an election, a very strange election, actually, in so many respects. The party which looks like it's going to win, which is the Conservative Party, basically isn't campaigning. It's all about Brexit, and my impression is that most people have already made up their minds up, and it's what the campaigning is doing isn't really very important. But perhaps and possibly we may be discussing some of that over the course of our program. I want to echo what Peter said about the impeachment. I mean, I find it very frustrating that we are obliged to cover a story that is such complete nonsense. I mean, there are stories we've had to cover, like Brexit, for example, which is real. Which is real, but I mean, it's very complicated and at times very grinding to have to work it through. But this is just, it's so silly, frankly, and stupid, and so empty of content that to try and get one's mind around it is very hard. But as Peter rightly says, there's lots else going on in the world. There's an important summit coming up in Paris, where the leaders of Ukraine, France, Russia, and Germany are due to meet. We touched on that recently in one of your programs, Peter, on Crosstalk. And we also have, as Peter correctly says, North Korea. And we have lots of things going on in the world. So, let's not become too absorbed with things like the impeachment, though we have to cover it in some ways, with Horowitz coming out shortly and with Barr doing his things and Duran doing his things. Well, obviously, we've got to look at that too. But anyway, we're looking forward to getting into real issues on this program, and I'm sure we will enjoy our discussion today.
Okay, let's get moving then.
Yeah.
Let's see, Angela from Georgia. How you doing, Angela? Nicholas from Manchester, Greg, Poland, Singapore, Marcelo. Let's see, the governor from Essex, from Ukraine, Mumbai. Raymond, how you doing? Raymond from Lagos, Nigeria, St. Petersburg, Florida. How are you? From Indonesia. Let's see, from Durham, Northeast England, sorry, Northeast England. Where else do we have people joining us from Australia?
Look who's joined us behind me.
Oh my God, it's real.
Unlike the impeachment process, Buddy is real. Okay.
I put you on speaker view so everyone can see. So Peter, if you want to say something, everyone will be able to see the dog right now.
Okay, you see it? Buddy, you enjoying this? You enjoying this today? Oh, we got another one coming up here, an insurgent. Okay. This is like a Bernie Sanders here. Okay.
All right. Okay, Jonathan from Texas. I hope they stay for the whole show. That'll be great.
Oh, I wish they wouldn't. I have no choice.
Amy from the Netherlands. Let's see where else. Yes, that's Buddy. Buddy and who else?
This is Robbie here.
But Robbie's on your shoulder and Buddy's on the table.
Buddy's Buddy's on my shoulder. This is Robbie.
Okay.
And right behind him is Skippy. So I got the whole gang.
He's kind of hiding.
No, we call him the gentleman dachshund. Okay. Actually, in Russian, the dachshund is taxa, and so I say taxa because it's faster to say. So anyway, here we go. We're all in.
There you go.
Like Corey Lewandowski, we're all in.
Okay. Let's see. We have from Germany, from Denmark, Christian. Where else? From Ipswich, England, from the west coast of Australia. Okay. Thank you guys for joining us on this live stream. We have some breaking news that we do want to get to. And Alexander, I'm going to throw this over to you. Hello from Ireland. Keep kicking ass. Thank you. Thank you very much. Alexander, WADA has announced that Russia is going to be banned from all sporting events, international sporting events, the Olympics, possibly, if they do qualify for the Qatar World Cup, they will be banned from that as well. Two Olympic Games, summer, winter, they won't be participating. Alexander, what do you make of this news? Terrible news for Russia.
Well,
for all of
sports as well. Absolutely.
Well, indeed. But can I just say a few things? I mean, first of all, this is perhaps less terrible than it might have been, and I'm going to come back to that in the sense that it's a 4-year ban, not an indefinite ban, and Russian athletes will be allowed to compete as neutrals. Now, I have to say, I have great issues with that. I think that's wholly wrong and frankly sinister, which is to strip people of their identity, their national identity. And it is extraordinary to me that in a world where issues of identity are taken so seriously, this can be so casually done and excites so little complaint or comment. I mean, just imagine if Americans, for example, were only allowed to compete in international sports competitions, provided they didn't do so as Americans, or people, from one of the Caribbean states, or from Africa, or wherever. I mean, I predict there would be a huge storm about it. Now, a few things. Firstly, I have to say this. The Russians have not handled this well. There was this issue can I say this very clearly, does not relate to any doping allegations by Russian athletes now. There's no suggestion that the Russian laboratory at the center of this story, WADA, the anti-doping laboratory in Russia, which has just now been stripped of its compliance status by WADA, is in any way handling doping tests badly. And there's no suggestion that Russian athletes today are involved in any kind of big doping issue. But what happened was the last year, WADA asked the Russians to hand over its database for what took place before 2015. And incredibly and very, very worryingly, Russian sports administrators actually dragged their heels on allowing the WADA access to that database. And he took a direct order from no less a person than Vladimir Putin himself, at the request of the head of the Russian laboratory, who by all accounts is a very decent and honorable man, to get that database finally released. And of course, what's happened inevitably is that all sorts of anomalies have been found. There have been suggestions that they've been tampered, that these things have happened through from tampering from the US, which I suppose possible. But taken together with a delay in allowing access to the database, there has to be some concern that some of the people who were involved before in the previous doping scandal, before 2015, have used this interval to try to manipulate the database, to conceal what they have been doing. I'm sorry to say this, I don't want to say it, but I have to say that is how it looks to me. Having said this, this is a wholly disproportionate and wrong decision. I mean, banning a whole country, disregarding the fact that there is no real danger of these athletes now, being involved in any kind of scandal, ignoring the fact that the original allegation, which was made way back in 2015, that there was a state-sponsored drugs problem in Russia, has been discredited. I think this is an important point that people don't know, but it's been looked at, and it's now accepted that neither the political leadership, Putin and his government, and nor the sports leadership of the country, the Russian Olympic Committee and all those people, were involved in any of these drug-related issues, and that it all was done at a much lower level, disregarding all of that. And as I said, imposing this kind of 4-year ban and obliging people to compete as neutrals, and as I say, stripping them of their identity. I mean, that is to me quite.
Well, it's really extraordinary because if you look at the origins of all of this, it has nothing to do with doping.
No.
It's because Russia got the Sochi Olympics. Oh. Sochi Olympics were an amazing success considering the barrage of Russian anti-Sochi game propaganda that was out there. Remember the double toilets, the broken doors, the hounding of gays. Well, all of it was nonsense. Okay, yes. I've seen the Olympic Committee. It is extraordinarily beautiful and very efficient for those have ever seen it. Number two, it is not widely known in the West that a considerable number of Russian athletes that participate under the Russian flag train outside of Russia. Okay, they have. The only connection they may have with their team or their sport is their name and citizenship. They're living in Canada, the United States, the UK, Ireland, all over the world. Yeah. And so this claim of an overarching doping, clandestine doping state-sponsored scheme is just utterly nonsense on its face. Okay, this is punishment. This is punishment. This is just all fronts, and this is their front, okay? And you have Russian figures, I don't have the names right on my off the top of my head, that are simply have acted in the most treasonous fashion, have asked for political asylum in the United States, and just completely disgraced themselves. Okay, I am not a chemist. I don't know anything about drugs at all outside of Alka-Seltzer in the morning. Okay, that's it. That's the whole run of it for me. But it seems to me, looking at the broader picture of this is a political campaign, and you know, WADA is its methodology, its policy making are just very dubious. Okay, like, obviously Russia doesn't have an advocate there. Okay, and Alexander McKirris is absolutely right. The United States would never tolerate its athletes being treated this way, ever. Oh, no, they'll just pick up their marbles from the playground and go away. Okay, absolutely. The Russians have shown enormous restraint, and I have to agree with Alexander McKirris is that I think they could have acted in a much more efficient, transparent fashion instead of dragging their heels, because that only cornered them into a situation where WADA would be able to pull out its arbitrary decision-making process.
I agree with all of that. I mean, if we go back to the two big sports competitions that they've been in Russia recently, which was first of all Sochi, which, as Peter correctly says, was an extremely well-organized Olympics with a magnificent opening ceremony, a beautiful Olympic village, and all of that. It was engulfed by scandal, a very, very carefully orchestrated political scandal, which had no basis. And Peter's reference to this allegation that there was a state-sponsored doping scheme in Russia. It has been investigated. It's been investigated by the International Olympic Committee. It has been looked at by the Court of Arbitration for Sport in Lausanne, and it is discredited. This is a fact, by the way, which you will not get from the Western reporting. There is now universal acknowledgement, including by WADA, that it never took place. And of course, the person who is at the center of all of this, who is the individual who's called in the West a whistleblower, and who WADA has accepted as a whistleblower, who is Dr. Rodchenkov, is universally accepted and he's the man who was at the center and cause and orchestrator.
I may be mistaken, but he's had psychiatric care.
Yeah, he's had psychiatric. He's got psychiatric problems. It's been accepted that he took bribes, that he was corrupt, and that he was the person who was pushing all these drugs on people for money. I mean, this is what it was all ultimately about. Now, there are issues. I mean, why was such a person ever appointed to head the national, doping laboratory, or such a dubious character? And as I said, there's been this issue about the delay in releasing the database. I'm not giving the Russians a blank check here at all. I'm not saying that they are innocents in this story, but that this is ultimately a political campaign. Of that I have absolutely no doubt. And the same thing happened with the other big sports competition, which was the World Cup. You had a scandal. There were claims that the Russians had bought it, that they bribed FIFA officials. Christopher Steele, remember him? He had the famous dossier. He produced a dossier, apparently. We've never seen it, but there's been allusions to it, in which he apparently provided Western intelligence agencies with all the details about all the bribes the Russians were supposed to have paid to 5 FIFA officials, except
say that again, Alexander. Say that again.
Yeah, no,
I'm a little bit taken aback now.
Yeah, no,
you mentioned Christopher Steele.
There's more than one dossier out
absolutely.
there. There are multiple.
There are Christopher Steele dossiers about all kinds of things. Christopher Steele provided a dossier to the High Court on behalf of MI6 during the Litvinenko proceedings. That's the man who was, poisoned with polonium. And apparently that influenced the judge, because that dossier, apparently, again, we've never seen it, so that it was the Russians who poisoned Litvinenko with polonium. I've argued that it wasn't true. And Steele was writing all kinds of dossiers. And we know for a fact though we've never seen it, that he provided a dossier and circulated a dossier claiming that the Russians bribed FIFA to get the World Cup. It was Christopher Steele, no one else. I mean, this is not, I'm not saying
No,
anything.
this is, but see,
I'm
this
not
is
saying anything that isn't,
the Christopher Steele methodology is this: make
Yeah.
a claim and then build a case towards it.
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
yeah, that's how it works.
I mean, for those who are interested, the person I found out about, I first heard about this, the existence of this Christopher Steele dossier about the Russian bribing of FIFA officials was none other than Luke Harding, Guardian, who got it from Christopher Steele himself. I mean, you know, we're not talking about something about which there is any doubt at all. That dossier exists. So,
Hey,
I mean,
Luke Harding, just so everyone know, Luke Harding is the crown prince of clowns. Covering Russia, okay?
Absolutely.
And then totally discredited, I mean, completely laughed at in his face, okay?
And a close...
And Paul Manafort visited Julian Assange at the Ecuadorian embassy, remember? Okay, no, it never happened.
Luke Harding is also apparently a friend of Christopher Steele's, and he's written a book in which he sort of defends him. But anyway, but the point is, it was all investigated. There was no bribery by the Russians to get the World Cup from FIFA, but there was a massive scandal. The entire FIFA leadership was basically forced to resign, not because they were bribed by Russia, but for all sorts of other reasons.
For other reasons.
Other reasons. And of course, when the World Cup did happen, there was an orchestrated campaign in Britain and the United States to dissuade sports fans from going to attend it, which was largely...
Which is absolutely true, because I would go into the center of town because in the cafes, I mean, if you didn't have a ticket, you could go to these cafes and they had these really big plasma screens, and people from all over the world drinking beer, waving their flags or crazy hats, okay? And I would go into these venues and I would sit down at a table. I'm not a football fan, okay? But I just wanted to see what the reaction was. And I would always try to find an English-speaking table. And I'd say, do you mind if I sit down? And some of them recognized me, some of them didn't. And the ones who did was like, well, yeah, sure, go ahead. And I said, what's your biggest surprise? Their answer universally was, they lied to us. This is a beautiful city. It's a wonderful games. People are friendly. Everything is in English. They had people up and down the main streets and boulevards saying, I speak English on the back. And it's like, how can I get to this hotel? How do you get to this metro? And they would all, it was this one wonderfully done. And I saw it with my own eyes. I was a witness. And every day that I was free, I went into the center of town and I just looked and walked, and it was so jam-packed. I'd never seen so many foreigners in Moscow. And it was a wonderfully run game. And the fans that came said it with their own words to me.
Yeah. But now, of course, Russia is banned for 4 years from hosting a World Cup, and specifically is going to be excluded from the World Cup. So this is what this is. As I said, this is clearly a political campaign. And what I will say, there is one point I would make, and I'm not putting a great deal of hope in this, and I think we should be very clear about this, but there is, I think, a legal possibility that the Court of Arbitration for Sports might actually either set aside this ban or amend it, because, as I said, there's no evidence, there's no suggestion that any Russian sports leaders, any members of the sports leadership, the Russian Olympic Committee, or anybody there is involved in any of this. There's no allegation that any Russian sports people themselves are involved in taking these drugs. This is a historic issue dating back to before 2015. Anybody who follows sport knows that 2015 in sports terms, that's 4 years ago, 5 years ago soon, that is another age. And I mean, there are very few athletes now who were involved in anything before 2015 who will be involved in sports now. I mean, the nature of sports is that careers are short in them.
It's ephemeral.
It's ephemeral. So it's not impossible that the Court of Arbitration for Sport will eventually have, rule against these sort of bans. But no one should count on it. It took a very long time to come to the correct decisions about the previous bans. It did eventually, it must be said.
But we have to, but we have to also say, and the bigger picture here is that this is destroying sport.
Yeah.
Okay. The transgenderism issue is destroying sport. This doping issue is destroying sport. I mean, all of these young people, and I think, I'm not much into sports, but when the Olympics comes around, I'll watch a few events, and you just see the best in the world. It's the best possible skill and ability and talent, and you really cheer them on, these young people that work at this. They work their whole lives towards one or two events, and because it's blind, obsessed political hatred, those hopes are dashed. Okay, and the viciousness of these people that want to destroy Russia's reputation or destroying sport in the process. Because if you're in track and field, or you're in hockey, or you're in any number of sports, and you know that there's a Russian team that you never competed against, you'll never know if you're really the best or not. That'll always be a nagging issue.
Well,
over politics.
Well, absolutely right. And of course, the other thing is, Peter, that people are very cynical about this, because we know that there is lots of drug taking and substance abuse going on in sports. All sorts of people do it from many, many countries. And again, singling out one country, which apparently is far from the worst. That's what I've heard. I mean, even if you go back for 5 years to 2015, when Rodchenkov was in charge, bad things were happening in Russia at that time. Worse things were happening in all sorts of other places, and everybody knows it. So there's lots of cynicism, and this is going to increase that cynicism. But it is the reality, and I coming back to the points Peter was making, this is the reality of the world at the moment. We have these very powerful institutions, WADA, to some extent the International Olympic Committee, the International Athletics Federation is another one. These leaders in sports, but all sorts of other issues. We had the great scandal over the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. The OPC, so the OPCW, which is now also, it turns out, essentially become an instrument of the State Department. So we have all of these.
Well, Alexander McHugh, you just got us demonetized. Thanks. Good job.
We weren't demonetized for the minute we start. It's all right.
Well, indeed.
Alexander, stay on that point, because my next question
that's a good point.
to you,
really important.
It's an important point. My next question to you was, whistleblower against Russia for WADA is good. Whistleblower against Trump with the impeachment hoax is good. Whistleblower for the OPCW bad.
We have whistleblowers of a lesser god, apparently.
Yeah,
well, absolutely.
What's going on with the OPCW at this point? This is a nice segue into another important
this is
story.
very good.
That's being covered. That's not being covered.
It's not being covered. Those are the two different stories here. There is the actual scandal within the OPCW, which I think is getting worse. Clearly, there is a major internal struggle going on within the OPCW, between its secretariat, which basically takes the Western view on things, and the experts, who are becoming increasingly worried and uneasy the way in which their work is being misreported or misused to serve someone's political agenda. So there is this internal struggle within the OPCW. And then there is also, and this is perhaps even more troubling and even more disturbing, a battle going on. Well, not even a battle. There is this incredible media blanket on this whole thing.
Except for Tucker.
But if we're looking at if we're looking at the Newsweek scandal, there's been a journalist who's resigned from Newsweek because of the fact that he's not being allowed to cover the crisis within the OPCW. And he says that, you know, he's a genuine whistleblower. He wants to come out and talk about what's going on in Newsweek. And apparently he's now facing all kinds of threats of legal action.
But very quickly explain to us what he wants to talk about, Alexander. Give us a little bit of context.
What he is saying, and I mean, this all stems apparently from the story about an email, an internal email, which has been published or leaked within the OPCW, which showed that the inspectors, the actual people who were physically on the ground, had very serious concerns about a draft report. They felt that the draft report that had been prepared by the OPCW did not reflect properly their findings, and that they seemed to be following a political course rather than an expert course. That's what that email says. Now, this Newsweek journalist wanted apparently to discuss that, and he's had access to all sorts of sources and people within Newsweek, and he wanted to talk about it. He found that he couldn't get past the editorial controls within Newsweek. They refused to let him write about or publish this story. He clearly feels very strongly about this, and can I say, risking your career in journalism by resigning and saying that you're going to write about all of this, that is an extraordinary step. That suggests to me somebody who is both very principled and under an extraordinary amount of pressure. But anyway, he says he wants to circulate what has actually happened, but he is coming under threats, presumably from Newsweek, of legal action if he actually does in fact write about it. So that gives you an idea of the kind of things that are going on. And may I say, you know, if you get your information from British media or American media, the mainstream media here, you wouldn't really know very much about the scandal. What you would probably be aware of is that there was a denial of any problems by the Secretary General of the OPCW, Fernando Arias, in which he said, you know, that he was absolutely happy that the final report, which was eventually published, is perfectly legitimate and objective and summarizes everything.
But we have to remind our viewers here, remember, this report justifies the illegal attack by the United States and its allies on Syria. And it was what this whistleblower is claiming, and what a lot of other people have thought that know something about chemical weapons. This was all a hoax, okay? And Tucker delved into it. He had Jonathan Steele, which is a good friend of mine, of long standing, one of the best British journalists out there. Not always particularly friendly to Russia, but a man of great professionalism and integrity. I mean, it was. I have to admit, I was quite. When we were on What's Up about, I was really quite shocked that Tucker would go delve into it, because it's something that you and all three of us had known for months on end. You know, it was just tearing our hearts out about this, and so many other experts saying this is ridiculous. This could not have happened the way they said it was. And then we have corroboration from a real whistleblower, and not some guy, some political crank at the water cooler somewhere in the swamp in Washington, D.C. Okay, it's extraordinary. You know, Julian Assange is languishing in prison and may die there for being a whistleblower. Chelsea Manning, a person of an enormous integrity, is languishing in prison now. But you have this water cooler guy that, you know, is going to be used as the basis for illegal regime change in the United States.
Well,
so, you know, yeah. Well, I'm sorry I gave us a segue to that one.
But anyway, let's just to finish on the OPCW, we've got no equivalent in Britain to Tucker Carlson. The only journalist in mainstream media who has covered this story at all, and to be fair, he's covered it extremely well, is Peter Hitchens in the Daily Mail. Now,
he's good.
Now, Peter Hitchens is a very good journalist. Lots of people follow him, but he is considered very much of a madman. And he has what I would call not maybe huge following. I mean, he's seen as something of a tolerated maverick. So, you know, we as I said, if you got your news from the Guardian, what you would know is that the OPCW is standing by its report. And there's also all sorts of reports about how the Russians are supposedly trying to muddy the waters by circulating all these concerns about the OPCW report, and that this is somehow seen by some people. And this would be seen as some people, well, they'll say, well, this is really nothing more than a Russian disinformation campaign, when of course it isn't. So this is what we're looking at. I mean, it cries out for investigation. And can I just say, just before we leave this particular topic, one particular line of I've seen is that, of course, the email that was published, supposedly its concerns were addressed in the final report that the OPCW was published. Those concerns were not addressed by the final report. That is why all these whistleblowers from within the OPCW are coming forward. So anybody who hears that, that is a fictional, a fictitious and wrong piece of apologia, if you like, for what is actually a very serious scandal.
Peter, real quick before we switch gears, why do you think Tucker Carlson is allowed to report this stuff? I mean, this is a...
Well, I think if we
because there's no doubt Fox does not want this out.
Yeah, I mean, I've been watching Tucker on his program since day one. Okay, he's been doing it now for almost 3 years now, and he is an anti-interventionist like we are. Okay, you and I have lamented, all three of us have lamented. He goes to a certain point that he kind of backs off. Okay, but on this story, it was like a thunderbolt for me, because again, one source that we all like here is Moon of Alabama, which watches it very, very closely. I really appreciate their hard work, and consortiumnews.com. But Tucker, somebody just said, Tucker, you just have to do this. I mean, this is such a malfeasance of journalism, and they took a great interest in it. I mean, I like it because Tucker brings on these swamp people, and he dismantles them. I mean, in real time. And I think this was just something that he felt it was so important, because if you look at this story in and itself, it is very symbolic of his attitude towards all of these interventions. Because I remember when MSNBC said, look at our beautiful missiles. Well, that set people up like us off, because that is so abhorrent. There's nothing beautiful about killing people like that for no justified reason at all. And Tucker never let it go. And obviously I don't know him personally. I'm a big fan, but watching him over the last few years, I think my explanation has credence.
All right. Alexander, AG Barr, 8 indictments. Have nothing to do with this Ukraine case stuff or the Horowitz stuff. Yeah, this has to do with Russiagate, actually, and more to the point, campaign donations illegal.
But it's still marginal. It's all marginal.
It's marginal. It's the connection is that this Natter guy was working with Mueller and did get a pardon, so that's the connection to Russiagate.
Yes.
But this guy, Natter, who's the center of this of all these indictments via Barr. This guy Natter is a convicted child pornographer. And this is going to definitely get us. If we weren't demonetized before, Peter, we're going to be demonetized now during this segment. That's for sure.
Well, that's the public record. That's public record.
It's a fact. It's a public record. It's a public record. He was smuggling. He was smuggling 14-year-old boys from Eastern Europe into the United States. And Mueller cut him a deal in order for this guy to testify and to provide information that would frame Trump in a bad light during the Russiagate hoax. What the hell is going on here? What has happened to the United States when you have guys like this cutting a deal? And another question to both of you guys, Alexander and Peter, what does this say about Barr that he's now launched these indictments? Does this show that Barr means business?
Well, to answer that question first, possibly, but as you correctly said, this is a peripheral indictment. I mean, this man is very low-hanging fruit in a sense that we will see whether he goes beyond this. I don't think you can say that because he's brought in indictments against this individual, it follows that he's going to bring indictments against more of them. But what I would say about the general issue, I'm sorry, Peter, to cut in, but briefly, what it does show is how obsessively partisan our whole Mueller investigation was.
Absolutely.
They were cutting deals with people like this, people who do this kind of appalling malpractice in order to, well, malpractice is not the right word. I mean, appalling crimes. I mean, really loathsome and disgusting crimes. And nonetheless, apparently Mueller and his people, Wiseman and all that, all those, were willing to cut deals with this person because they wanted to go after Trump. And you said, what does this say about the state of the United States? Well, what does it say? It says, I think terrible things, because this is a terrible, terrible thing that we've just learned about.
Yeah, but one can.
I just want to preface real quick, Peter, Nader, not Nadler, because I see in the chat.
Nader.
Nader.
Two very different people.
I think he's of Lebanese descent too.
Yes, and he was donating to the Hillary Clinton campaign. So I just want to clear up those two facts that I see in the live stream.
My gut tells me this is the low hanging fruit that Barr and his investigations has picked up going through the key elements of his investigation of the origins of Russiagate and the shenanigans that was going on around the 2016 election, including the Democratic side. On the Republican side, there doesn't seem to be anything there to this date. Okay, looking at the DOJ, looking at the FBI. And he's come across these things, okay, in the pursuit of his major goals. He's come across these issues, and I think I think maybe wisely, if I'm right, wisely to separate them from other issues that are more at the center of his investigation. So he can pick up this malfeasance as he was looking, and he found these things, and he's put it in a separate box and put it out there. Because I think he wants to avoid some kind of intermingling. So it's just basically he threw out his net and he picked up these little ones, okay? Not to minimize the grotesqueness and unbelievable nature of these allegations, these indictments. So I think that's it. I think it's just peripheral, and it's what he picked up in his dragnet, and it's not the main show. Now, having said that, kind of moving our segue forward, I mean, I think we have to be careful with Horowitz and Durham. I mean, maybe we're just being victims of, the Hill and Politico and people like that, what's called a prebuttal, trying to get ahead of the story to lower expectations. My sense is, okay, and I'm really going in the weeds here right now. I think both sides of the divide are going to find what they want, and both sides are going to be disappointed. And they're going to trumpet whatever they think that will serve their cause. I don't think it's going to be conclusive. I just don't. I mean, maybe this mid-ranking lawyer that fiddled with the FISA warrant, maybe that'll be the centerpiece, which is very, very important. But it won't get the big fish that we hope to see go taken down and be put into orange jumpsuits. Okay, I'm trying to lower expectations here. I think there is a concerted effort in the mainstream to lower expectations. But I've been looking at Lindsey Graham. He's a cagey guy. He's really cagey. He has a lot more power than he lets on. And I see him always taking a step back and not being as aggressive as he would have been, like, for example, with Kavanaugh. So watch what Lindsey Graham is doing, because he seems to be wanting to temper things. And you know, he is a big defender of the deep state. And you have to wonder what his loyalties are. I mean, he's, you know, he's in the same bed with the intelligence community big time, okay? And I think he wants to make sure that Trump isn't damaged at all, but I think he has very strong loyalties to the deep state. So he wants to protect them as well. He's going to try to find a way to segue that. That's my gut feeling, because he hasn't been on Tucker for a while. And when I've seen him on Laura or like on Hannity, he kind of is, he's not the same Lindsey Graham that we saw maybe like 6 months ago, okay? And he's privy to a lot of information as being a powerful senator. So I'm just putting that out there. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but I'm just kind of looking at the optics of it over the last few months, because I do watch these programs every single morning to get a clue what's going on. And I watched him kind of a little bit of a chameleon-like character.
He was on Sunday morning's Futures, Peter, and actually I wanted to talk about Graham.
Yeah, I saw
so I'm glad that you brought it up.
I saw that.
Because I think that Graham is purposefully trying to lower all the expectations and trying to calm things down, because he said that if impeachment moves forward and Pelosi does decide to get the House to vote and to impeach Trump, which is an absolutely stupid move, then it goes to the Senate. And Graham was very specific. He said, I'm in the Senate, I want this thing to go quick. And I'm going to advise President Trump to make it quick. And I don't want it to drag out. I don't want to call all these witnesses and everything. He wants it to be quick. And I think you're right, Peter. I think the reason he wants it to be quick, and I would like Alexander, Peter, your comments on this.
Yeah.
I think Graham is going to push for a very quick Senate trial, if it does get there, very quick Senate trial, because he doesn't want all this stuff to get out there.
Yeah.
He doesn't want Schiff to testify. He doesn't want the whistleblower to testify. He doesn't want Hunter Biden. He doesn't want to expose the deep state, his boss. He doesn't want to expose it all.
Yeah. I mean, can I just say it will depend a great deal on who presides over the Senate trial. If it's the Chief Justice of the United States, Justice Roberts, he may take a different view. But can I, before we get into these important things, can I just say one more thing about Nader? And when I said that he's peripheral, he is peripheral to the narrative of Russiagate. He is peripheral to, and he's actually no role at all in the issue of Ukrainegate. The indictments against him are very serious, and they do cast a light on the Clinton Foundation, which has this extraordinary connection, as it turns out, with people in the United Arab Emirates, where Nader had all these sort of, connections.
Deals.
The deals. So we must be very careful what we say, because obviously there's legal proceedings underway. I come back to what I always say when there's legal proceedings. People are entitled to the presumption of innocence. We do not do reverse Kavanaughs on this program and start saying that someone is guilty of things which haven't yet been proved against them. But if these allegations that have been made against Nader are true, then they do lend force to lots of the things that have been said for a very long time about the Clinton Foundation and how it was operating. So when I said that it's peripheral, he is peripheral. This case is peripheral to Russiagate. It does cast a horrible light on the way that Mueller and Wiseman were conducting themselves when they pursued the Mueller investigation into Russiagate. But let us not walk away from these allegations themselves and say that they are not important. In themselves, they are very important. And this is certainly a case we should look into. Now, about the Horowitz report and what's going to happen, I think we have to wait and see. I mean, I've heard very different arguments about Horowitz. He has, in the past, as we know, suggested indictments against people who he has accused of not just misconduct, but actually criminal misconduct. I mean, we know that he did that about Comey, for example. But one point I have heard various people make, I heard Devin Nunes make it, for example, and Devin Nunes is not Lindsey Graham. One point that Devin Nunes made is that Horowitz is operating within a very restricted remit. He is not there ultimately to discuss the origins of Russiagate. He is there to discuss whether or not the procedure that was used and the rules that apply to the obtaining of FISA warrants was followed. Now, if he says that the rules were thrown out of the window, then that is in itself an important thing in itself, and it is something that Barr and Duran might want to work with. There are also whispers on the side, and of course we don't know to what extent these whispers are true, that Barr is apparently, shall we say, less than satisfied by Horowitz's findings, and that he feels that Duran has already in his investigations gone beyond the things Horowitz has felt able to look at, and as a consequence is reaching rather more serious conclusions than Horowitz was. So maybe the right way to approach Horowitz is as a step to the truth rather than as a gateway to the truth. But let's wait and see.
You know, it's really interesting, kind of to back up both of our points, though slightly different, but I think that a point that's happening right now, probably as we speak, is that we have another congressional committee working on articles of impeachment. And if you look at the procedures of Congress on Monday, if you look at how Congress works, the lower house, the House of Representatives, they start proceedings at 6 o'clock in the evening. They don't start, by tradition, they don't start on Monday mornings. They are now. Why? Because of Duran and Horowitz, okay? They're trying to control the narrative, okay? Both sides see this going on right now, okay? And it's all about, you know, what we've just done, Alexander McCarris and I, over the last 3 or 4 minutes, we've basically talked about how smoke and mirrors work in this whole affair, okay? Really what it is, it's how you manipulate and control the narrative. It's not the substance of it, okay? That's why we got this flurry of articles over the last 72 hours about low expectations. Now, maybe it's true. I don't know, but I know someone's trying to manipulate me, okay? And that's what we're talking about here.
Who's trying to manipulate?
Well, if
both sides.
Both sides?
Both sides are, of course they are, absolutely, that's entirely right. But if we talk about these stories which have been planted in all these newspapers, the New York Times as well, by the way, and I believe the Washington Post, I mean, it's quite obvious to me that they are coming from some of the people who have been investigated by Horowitz. What happens when you have these kind of investigations is that before a report is written, the person who writes it sends the draft, not of the entire report, but of those sections which deal with a specific individual, to that individual, for that individual to make comments about and to respond to any conclusions that they may disagree with. That is absolutely routine. In fact, that is correct practice. So, I mean, I'm not saying, you know, any particular, I'm not identifying who specifically has provided these leaks, but people who will have been sent sections of the draft Horowitz report to look at would include Jim Comey, Andrew McCabe, Lisa Page, Peter Strzok, possibly John Brennan, though this is an FBI investigation, internal FBI investigation, not a CIA investigation. Rod Rosenstein, Bruce Orr, all of these people. And I am going to make a guess, it's only a guess, but I mean, it's a shrewd guess and it's consistent with all the facts that the people who are providing all this information to the media about what Horowitz is saying are those same people, you know, Comey, Page, Strzok.
Everybody except for, what's his name? The guy that's in the center of all of this.
Carter Page.
Carter Page, yeah.
He wasn't even allowed to see anything.
Oh, no, of course he's not, because you see, he's the victim. So you see, we don't show it to the victim. We show it to the people who persecuted the victim. So that's the way these things work.
Let me tell you what one of my major concerns of all of this.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, but that's it. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
That's exactly.
What did you say? Yeah. What was that, Alexander? I didn't catch that.
This is supposed to be an internal FBI investigation. It's not supposed to be it's not a criminal probe.
Okay.
I mean, that needs to be made very clear about.
But because it's an internal investigation, is my concern. Can they properly investigate themselves, even with Attorney General Barr there? The institutional sense of self-preservation is so very strong, all right? And I think that maybe, okay, with the exception, Alexander McCurris has a legal education, legal experience. I don't. But, I think if someone like myself, obviously outside the loop, outside the country, I would look at this thing and I might draw different conclusions. But institutions tend to protect themselves, okay? And I think that's my biggest worry. Attorney General Barr has been Attorney General before. He knows how it works. And I'm not trying to cast aspersions here, but I think there's a certain mentality out there that I would look at something and be really upset about, but someone inside the loop would probably be, well, a little bit more understanding, and that's kind of how it works, and you know what I mean? And then that's my concern.
Well, Peter, to answer your question, I have worked for institutions and they do protect themselves. And Horowitz is the Inspector General of the FBI. He is an internal FBI official. He is an FBI official who is investigating the FBI. And of course they protect themselves. And of course there is a structural desire on the part of institutions to protect themselves. Now, I've seen it happen in Britain. People look into things that go wrong. And, in British institutions that I have worked in, and in private, when they talk amongst each other, they're absolutely clear about this. They give steers. They say, make sure that, it doesn't go there and doesn't go here. And let's find ways round. And I am sure this goes on. No, of course, the FBI cannot be relied upon to investigate itself. That is why one hopes that Durham, who is further removed from the FBI than Horowitz is, might do a more thorough job. But Durham is a part of the Justice Department, and the FBI is a part of the Justice Department. Barr heads the Justice Department. One cannot be confident that this thing is going to result in any final.
That is so absolutely right. That's so absolutely right, and that's exactly as you were speaking. That's what came into my head. Is that nobody is going to be satisfied.
No.
People that are engaged in this are never all, and we're on one side. I'm on the side of the law. The others are on the other side against the law, in my opinion. But what's going to happen here is that this is not going to resolve anything. No. That's what I worry about.
No.
It's just really what it might do is it may increase tensions.
Well, indeed.
Because I mean, I think all of us that have been watching this very closely, I mean, it seems to me beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was a conspiracy or something akin to a conspiracy against candidate Trump and President Trump. It seems patently obvious to me. Okay. And there's going to be a lot of people like myself, which whatever Barr says, I'm more or less going to go along with it, because I think, we have to draw a line here somewhere, but not everybody is going to do that. Okay. This is so intensely partisan. I mean, this entire impeachment charade. I mean, I've been saying since December 2016, I remember looking at it, a crosstalk, institutions are being destroyed. And oh my God, the pillars of these institutions are on fire right now. And it's only going to get worse. Yeah. And I think these reports are not going to satisfy true believers, quote unquote, on either side of this are not going to be satisfied.
Well, they're not going to be satisfied. I mean, there is a little hope that Barr and Durham might be a bit more aggressive in investigating the CIA, which is not part of the Justice Department bureaucracy. But the American system relies for oversight to be provided by Congress. It is Congress that is supposed ultimately.
That's why we go back to Lindsey Graham.
Well,
That's why
indeed.
we go back to Lindsey Graham.
Well, I mean, you have problems because, of course, in the House of Representatives, the people who are in charge of all the committees, well, we're looking at Schiff and we're looking at Nadler. They're not going to want to investigate the Justice Department and the FBI on these issues because, of course, the Justice Department and the FBI have been carrying out their agendas. So there's no way that's going to happen. What happens in the Senate? Well, that we will have to wait and see whether people like Lindsey Graham will do their job when it goes to the Senate. I mean, I don't know. I'm skeptical because I do think that ultimately, faced with a problem as big as this, the temptation will be to close the whole thing down and to identify a few scapegoats, sort of minor figures, and put all the blame on them and say that mistakes were made, but everybody acted in good faith, and it was understandable that all sorts of things went on. I mean, the temptation to do that institutionally is enormous.
And we have to remember there's so many people in positions of power and positions of influence to this day, as an article of faith, wanted to protect the legacy of Barack Obama. And I believe that to my core, okay? And I mean, any counterintelligence operation, the president has to sign off on it. And this is exactly what it was.
Yes.
Look, guys, no one talks about what happened to Kavanaugh anymore.
No.
That's already been,
Yeah.
down the memory hole.
Out, yeah.
People, guy that, I guess except for the guy that doxed everyone, no one else got any kind of trouble.
Yeah, no one's talking about the mysterious gossip blower anymore. And we're just 3 weeks removed from that. Absolutely. I mean, and no one's pushing to get his name out, or no one's talking about that anymore. They're trying to pull a fast one on Epstein and trying to, put that in the memory hole. But the internet and the people are not letting that happen.
Well, that's right.
Which is really interesting. And of course, you had the UK media and the Prince Andrew that just gave a terrible interview. He kind of brought it onto himself by reviving that story, but they're trying to throw that in the memory hole. So I think at the end of the day, listening to both of you guys, and I have to kind of agree in that at the end of the day, I can't imagine, even though we know there's the evidence that we're going to see Comey in cuffs. Getting taken away.
Guys, I have to just leave you a moment. There's some, but you carry on. I won't be bothered.
Yeah, okay. We will.
No, but the Epstein story, where did that go? Which memory hole did that go down?
That's why I think, Peter, do you honestly think we're going to see Brennan and Clapper and all these guys? I mean, Clapper's already purged himself how many times already, and nothing's happened to him?
Yeah.
Nothing. I
mean, it really puts into stark relief the two-tier system we have.
They're cutting a deal with the child pornographer. They're cutting a deal with the child pornographer.
And my good friend Daniel McAdams got kicked off of Twitter for calling Hannity retarded.
Daniel McAdams from the Ron Paul Institute.
Yeah. No, but see, what happens is, this goes back to one of my favorite hobby horses here, is that it just shows the level of corruption among these elites. Okay, so CNN and MSNBC want to say it's all conservatives and the Republicans, and then the Fox people say it's all the Democrats and the liberals and CNN. Yeah, but it's not. Okay, these ruling elites, all in are corrupt. They protect themselves. They enrich themselves, and they basically have impunity from being held accountable for their actions. They advocate policies that they don't have to live with the consequences of, like, take people's guns away. They all have private security that have guns. They're against walls, but they have walls in their own gated communities. Okay, they're all for immigration, but not in their zip code. Okay, the hypocrisy goes on and on and on. Okay, How many of these people in Silicon Valley are in bed with the Chinese? But Russia's the great enemy, okay? Joe Biden is a point man for Ukraine, and his son enriches himself. Joe Biden's the point man on China. And who gets enriched? His own family, okay? It's just, I mean, it's so obvious to me. It's so damn corrupt, okay? And then what they do is they want to take your democracy away from you. I mean, Michael Moore is someone that I do not like to quote, okay? But he was absolutely right in his last film before the election. The people have been, everything has been taken away from them, except for one thing, the franchise. And they actually used it. And now the elites are furious about that. And they want to take that away from us. It's just one step at a time. But, you know, we have to be careful not to fall into a tribe. Okay, because that works for these elites, having the tribes fighting each other. Okay, and they're all hand in the glove. Okay, and they do not have the national interest and the interest of the people at heart. No, their own personal ones, very selfish. Okay, that's called globalism, and that's exactly what they practice.
Yeah, and they're eating themselves from the inside out, Peter. And welcome back, Alexander, because I think it's a Trump derangement syndrome is eating them up alive. I mean, it really is.
Invoking the Federalist Papers over and over again made me gag. Okay, I mean, all of the Federalist Papers, you know, all of the writers of the Federalist Papers were slaveholders. We have to take their statues down. We have to rename Washington, D.C., all this stuff here. No, these people are so hypocritical. It's so patently obvious they're hypocritical. They will invoke these, this history, this culture, these people when it suits their purposes. In the next news cycle, you know, to take Monticello and burn it to the ground because it was the owner was the former president was the owner of slaves. Just wait, okay? But they'll use Thomas Jefferson and John Madison, John Jay, you know, all of these great writers. They'll use them to their advantage, and then when they don't need them, they trash them. Hypocrisy.
Yeah, you know what my take on all of this is, Alexander. Let me know what you think, Peter. Let me know what you think. This has to get to the Senate. They have to call Hunter Biden to testify. They have to call Adam Schiff to testify. They have to call Alexandra Chalupa to testify. They have to call Victoria Nuland. They have to call Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, the gossip blower, everybody. But it's never going to happen.
Lindsay won't let it happen.
Right. It's never going to happen. But if you get all of these people in one room on TV for the whole world to see,
lock the doors.
Exactly. And just have them explain what the hell was going on. Then you don't need Barr, you don't need Duran, you don't need any of this stuff. The people can decide for themselves. It's never going to happen, though, is it? Where is Chalupa gone? Where is Steele? Where the hell is Steele?
Well, let's not despair, because of course we haven't yet got to the Senate, and there's one very powerful group of people who agree with you, and that is the House Republicans. I mean, we discussed in the video their pre-battle report, the one that came out ahead of Adam Schiff's rambling, blustering, comic strip version of an impeachment report. But the House Republicans there made it very clear that they want all these people to give evidence. All the people you've named, actually, every one of them, including Christopher Steele, including Hunter Biden, including Alexandra Chalupa, they're all named there. The Republicans wanted them to be called, and they may, you know, insist on them being called. It does very much depend.
And Assange to explain
yeah, absolutely. But it does all very much depend. They didn't mention Assange, but you know,
what I'm saying is to get to the bottom of everything.
Oh, I agree. Yeah,
you have to call all these people.
It comes down to who chairs, who presides over the Senate trial. Now, as I understand it, the correct procedure that's always followed is that it is the Chief Justice of the United States, not Lindsey Graham. The Chief Justice of the United States is Roberts. Now, I don't know very much about him, and I'm not going to say how real Roberts' role is going to be. I don't know that either. Whether it's really going to be controlled by powerful senators like Lindsey Graham and all the others, I just don't
I
have
mean,
that granular
well, what-
knowledge.
Okay,
to be
but
able
what,
to
okay, this is what more or less
Yeah.
is the lay of the land here. I mean, the Senate gets to determine the rules of the impeachment, okay?
Yeah.
Just like the House gets to
Yeah.
determine how to write the articles of impeachment, which they are so
Yeah.
beyond his precedent, particularly the Clinton impeachment. But the Senate, they can make their own rules. Now, Justice Roberts, his position is going to be, he may invoke, I mean, if he looks at the case for impeachment as a justice, he may just say, where are your fact witnesses? Who's being called?
Yeah.
Because if what Lindsey wants to do is quick and dirty. He wants a one-day thing, have it done. But the problem with what Lindsey wants to do is that it may backfire. I mean, this is like a no-brainer win for Trump because the Republican parties will hold the line, barring Mitt Romney or somebody like that. But it's a slam dunk. But what will happen is if Lindsey doesn't do it the right way, is that if it is a 2-hour trial and then a vote, they're going to say that's a cover-up. You see what I'm saying? How it can turn against them? They'll say they don't even want to get to the truth. Okay, they're just partisan. They're just they're in a cult. That was the news cycle last week. Remember, they're all in a cult.
Yeah.
Okay, so you bet Lindsey Graham and the others better manage this the right way because MSNBC and CNN will have a field day with this. They'll say sham justice, sham trial, sham, shame. That's what I worry about. And that is the dilemma they face because Alexander Christopher is absolutely right. You bring in all of these people.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's exactly what Trump wants. But see, Lindsey, he is a partisan. He's not pro-Trump. I don't think he is. He's partisan. And he's for his clan in the political elites. Okay. So, I mean, you can watch Hannity, and Hannity is a parody of himself these days. It's not. This is not going to be a clear-cut, absolute narrative win for Trump, and they better be careful how it's managed because could blow up in their face.
Well, indeed, because of course a lot of the Republicans in the Senate don't particularly like Trump. So one way of closing it down and at the same time doing Trump some political damage might be to do exactly what you said. I'm going to make one little point, one rather mischievous point, which is, of course, that you have an ally in any attempt to try to get all of these people before the Senate, and that is in Nadler. Nadler, who clearly is not one of the sharpest knives in the drawer, to put it mildly, because what he's trying to do by bringing all this Russiagate material, all this Mueller material into the impeachment articles, is he's actually making it easier for the Republicans, if they want to start calling witnesses who are relevant to the Muellergate, the Mueller and the Russiagate narrative, and which would of course include people like Chalupa and Hunter Biden, but also all sorts of other people like Christopher Steele, for example. And it's been very interesting to see that Adam Schiff, who is, let's face it, a more intelligent man than Nadler, seems to have grasped this point.
That's not saying much.
That's not saying much, but he is resisting Nadler's attempt to try to broaden the impeachment articles into bringing in Mueller material, precisely because he knows that if it is brought in, it makes it easier for the president's friends in the Senate, and I'm sure Trump has some friends in the Senate, to argue that more witnesses should be brought in rather than less, and to ensure that there is a full trial rather than a short one. So Nadler actually is doing Trump a big service. I don't think he obviously doesn't understand it. Parts of the media don't understand it, but Schiff, I think, does understand it because Schiff is a trial lawyer. He has experience of these things.
Yeah, but Alan, just to kind of push back a little bit, mean, everything Adam Schiff has done to date has backfired.
Oh yeah.
I mean, spectacularly. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Again, we've just given out here in the last few minutes a number of scenarios, but I don't see any of these scenarios being the ultimate arbiter where we get some kind of definitive, quote unquote, truth. One of the things I think is interesting here is that we always have to remember that when we're hypersensitive to politics, okay, but the average person isn't. And I think what Jerry Nadler has to worry about, because it's Adam Schiff has already realized it, is that the case they're presenting against the president is so obtuse to the average person. They just don't have a clue. I mean, I don't want to sound vulgar or anything, but in the Clinton case, there was a blue dress. Okay, there was a blue dress. Okay, and in the case of Richard Nixon, there were the tapes. It's easy to digest. It's easy to understand. This whole process against Trump, Ukraine, Zelensky, phone call. Why are they using Latin all the time? Quid pro quo. I mean, a lot of people. I mean, we know this anecdotal evidence is that Congress people came back from recess and no one's asking about it because nobody understands it. I mean, we're smart guys. We don't really understand it. I mean, for me, it's a farce. This is just a ridiculous witch hunt. It's a fishing expedition, and it's all about partisanship. And I think that's the only thing the electorate will pick up on. This is partisan, and that's a lose because it will only inflame the partisan divide.
Peter, trials are never a good way to arrive at the truth on any issue.
Thank you. Good point.
I mean, that is
I agree, Your Honor.
Fundamental truth. I mean, can I just say the most famous trial in history, the presiding judge, who was Pontius Pilate, actually asked the question, what is truth? So, don't expect truth to come out of a Senate trial. What we would want is not truth, it's information. That's what we would be looking at, because this is ultimately a political issue. And if information comes out of this trial, which points to the behavior of people like Chalupa and Hunter Biden and all those sort of things, then those of us who are not part of that trial can take that information forward and use it to press for further and more detailed investigations. But whether that will happen or not, that's a very good question. And we will just have to see. I don't know how the Republicans are going to play this. There is always, in these kind of scenarios, push and pull. There will be some Democrats like Nadler, who will want to enlarge this thing. They will be wanting to make this a big circus because they are so afflicted by Trump derangement syndrome that they don't understand the weakness of their own case. There will be others. There will be others like Schiff, who at some level probably do, and will want it in a very restricted format, and will go along with any attempt by some Senate Republicans to try to narrow this issue. And then, as I said, there will be the president's supporters in the Senate who will in turn want to broaden it. I don't know how this is going to play out. I don't know how these decisions are made. And one of the other things you learn about trials is that they develop their own dynamic, which is not always very easy to control. OJ is that's a classic example of that. And by the way, remember, that was a case where many people, myself included, feel that the truth most emphatically did not come out.
Yep.
So, let's wait and see. I mean, there's an awful lot in play yet, but, we shouldn't expect truth to come out of this. It isn't going to. This is a stage in a political and perhaps a legal game.
Yeah, I think irrespective of whatever the outcome is, I think the average American is going to say, what was this all about? Mark my words.
And if it ever gets too close to the truth, Peter, I'm sure that there's going to be some sort of conflict that the deep state will brew up. You mentioned North Korea, Syria. He's not really pulling out. Iran.
Oh,
what's the state? what's the
Iran
state of Trump's foreign policy at this moment, and how the deep state is ramping things up on a global level for some sort of conflict to break out?
For a guy that came in saying he wanted to drain the swamp, he's in a ditch. Okay, he's in a ditch. I posted a couple days ago from Americans Conservative. Trump, he has not achieved. His foreign policy is muddled at best, and that's being charitable. All right. What I worry about is I look at this Iran saber rattling going on. Netanyahu is really in trouble. He's really trying to get the U.S. to back him on a preemptive strike against Iran. Now, we've heard this for a very long time, but because he's an political situation where he faces, if he leaves government, he faces criminal charges and he faces jail. So he wants to stay in power. And there's only one thing that gets everybody riled up. That's Iran. Also, the situation we have with North Korea, I think that I will do a program on that very, very soon, because that whole policy portfolio has been so badly managed. And I give kudos to Trump for his personal efforts to move things forward. I respect him a lot for that, but it's all been squandered. We're back to where we were. We're almost back to Rocket Man again. We have this ridiculous coup with what's his name, unknown Guaido, still in the. It's floating above air without any meaning. Not pulling out of Syria, pouring more troops into the Middle East to what end? Maybe one little glimmer of hope is there's maybe now going to be a serious rethink of the relationship with Saudi Arabia with that recent terrorist attack. Should wake up to everybody what kind of place Saudi Arabia is. So it's a real muddle. I'm as the only element of Trump's election efforts in 2016 that interests me at all was foreign policy. And I think he's performed very badly, and I'm very, very disappointed. And the only person that has been able to make hay of all of this is Tulsi Gabbard. She's the only one that's been able to say, look, we really using the same rhetoric but in a much more articulate way, because she is a veteran. She did 2 tours of the Middle East. She's still an active member of the military in a reserve sense. So, I know a lot of Trump supporters on this podcast will be disappointed with my words, but that's how I feel, because I think that there's just too many people around Trump that want to sabotage him in his foreign policy. And Trump has his mind elsewhere for obvious reasons.
Alexander, what are your thoughts on what's going on with Iran, with North Korea, with Syria? I'm sure at the end of the day, the one certainty when all of this Russiagate, Ukrainegate stuff, calms down, Russia did it. I think that's going to be the one consensus.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the one thing everybody's in agreement about. I mean,
so give us your take on all of this stuff, however you want to.
They're not going to retreat from that. In fact, I mean, I read an absolutely bizarre article in The Guardian the other day in which the Russians are now being blamed for murdering the French writer Albert Camus, which took place in 1960. I mean, this is the sort of level of, Russia did it that's evolved now. But, when one looks at international affairs, the state of the world, I think one of the most extraordinary things about this is, firstly, the failure of Donald Trump to act on his election wishes or promises, or the policy that he set out in the election. He's not improved relations with Russia. Relations with Russia are in a terrible way. If he wanted to, divide Russia from China, China and Russia are now even stronger in their alliance than they were previously. The situation in the Middle East is going from bad to worse. American prestige there has fallen. The United States is still bogged down in Syria, and it's bogged down in Afghanistan also. There have been various attempts to try and get out of the conflicts in Afghanistan. and in Syria, and Trump makes all kinds of efforts to do so, and always and invariably, he runs into a wall of opposition, and he always and invariably ends up backing down. He retreats from the decisions that he seems to want to make. And of course, he's got himself into this conflict with Iran, which frankly isn't going to take him very far. I think people who expect, when they hear about protests in Iran, that Iran is about to collapse are deluding themselves, frankly. I don't think Iran is going to collapse.
Oh, no.
And I mean, that whole strategy is misguided. And about North Korea, I mean, we are, as Peter says, we're going back to square one. Only, of course, it isn't actually square one, because the United States got the Chinese and the Russians to agree to all sorts of sanctions on North Korea. The Chinese and the Russians, having seen what's happened over the last few years, having seen this stop-go attempt to get negotiations between the US and North Korea going, having seen the way the US has acted over the course of these negotiations, are not going to be helpful anymore. Both of them have been put under huge pressure. China, through the tariff war, the trade war, Russia through the sanctions. Neither of them is any longer interested in helping the United States with North Korea. And the North Koreans, for their part, have very skillfully managed to mend their fences with both the Chinese and the Russians. So it's not actually square one. It's a situation where the North Koreans are significantly stronger than they were, and the United States is significantly weaker.
Yeah.
It's worrying that people in the United States can't see this.
It's very interesting. I mean, I guess the biggest deficit of all is for having a proactive approach to all of this. I mean, what we get is we get criticisms. Iran won't give up its nukes, which is just so nauseatingly stupid. Okay, it's not about a nuclear program at all. But I just heard that today on Fox News, and in North Korea too. The thought that North Korea is interested in its own national security never crosses the mind of the blob and of the mainstream media. My point here is that I would have wanted to see a grand vision for restabilizing the world, and it would be on a multilateral basis, and it would have taken an American president with enormous amount of courage to do that. But Trump backs down in front of the Fiona Hills and the Vindmans and Kent and all of these people, all of these middle tier nobodies. Okay?
Who then stab him in the back.
And then stab him in the back. Okay. Yes. And that is what he needed was, again, I'm not praising the man, but I'm praising the political acumen, and someone like Henry Kissinger that would really have a vision, but we have no one like that. I don't know if anyone like that will ever exist again, because these are just interagency consensus people. Okay. That sounds like the Central Committee of the Soviet Union. Okay. I mean, of the Communist Party. There's no vision out there. And what it is that it's just treading water. And the thing is that the American foreign policy blob and the media can't comprehend a world where the US doesn't lead. And that is the great tragedy of all of this, because the more they can't get their head around that we need to do something different, the more we move into a very dangerous position where the US as the global hegemon is losing ground every single day. And they have to lash out explaining why. And they have an answer. It's Russia, okay? But that's not the reason at all. It's because they cannot see what's going on in the world. And they can't even see it out of self-interest, actually. That's what's really bizarre about it, okay? I mean, the Roman Empire collapsed because it didn't defend itself. It didn't believe in itself anymore, okay? And then we have these people testifying against Trump from his own government, don't recognize the realities of the world at all.
No.
Okay, they would rather stab him, their boss, in the back than deal with real, serious geopolitical realities. Okay, not a week passes, a major a news outlet talks about, well, maybe, we should deal with the Russians in a different way because they're getting too close to China. I mean, that horse left the barn 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and they don't understand it. I mean, these are supposed to be experts. They're not. They're just partisan hacks. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, in relation to that, Peter, what you've just said about, you do get these articles. There was this article in the New York Times that we were talking about a few weeks ago, which was talking about, the need for a rapprochement with Russia. But it never comes anyway with any real desire to do anything that might persuade.
Because the status quo.
It's
status
exactly.
Quo. Just defend the status quo.
The US has now got itself into a position where the bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy isn't just the people who work in the government, it's the people who work in all these think tanks and NGOs and who are entrenched in the media and also in academia. All of this blob, as it's called now, they won't retreat anywhere. They won't retreat with respect to North Korea. They won't retreat with Iran. They're already conjuring the specter of Munich when it comes to the Paris Agreement.
We're making a mistake by using retreat because I'm agreeing with you, but just in a different way. I would say instead of retreat, I think a better way of phrasing it is reimagine.
Well, reimagine, but
you see my point. You see my point, okay? Well, because by retreat is negative, okay, and that's always presented. Well, and I would say we don't need to retreat; we need to reimagine. I'll give you a perfect historical example: the end of the Cold War. The Soviet Union wasn't defeated in the Cold War. The Soviet Union decided to opt out of the Cold War. Okay, it reimagined the world. And it reimagined itself in the world. And that's what I'm saying here is that we have to start reimagining, because reimagining can have multiple possibilities. But the blob always says, no, that's one step back. Well, maybe 10 step backs would be better. Okay. And maybe in this area, one step forward. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think we should be more robust vocabulary.
The trouble is that the blob does see these things as retreats. They see them as retreats. They see if we relax sanctions on North Korea or relax sanctions on Cuba. I mean, because there's going to be lift, but the sanctions come back. Hasn't succeeded. Cuba is still a communist country. But, we go back, we always revert in the end to what we were doing and have been doing for the last 50 or 70 years. I mean, I think it was Kent who was this State Department official who was saying, that, this has been the policy the US has followed, ever since the end of the Second World War for 70 years, not understanding that the world has changed completely in those 70 years. But, they are stuck in these things. And they did seem to be able to adjust. They don't want to accept the policies that they pursued, maximalist policies that they pursued in Ukraine have failed. They don't want to accept the fact that Iran is here to stay. They don't want to accept the fact that North Korea now has its nuclear weapons and it's never going to give them up, and that its diplomatic position has become much stronger. They don't want to accept that the Chinese and the Russians are moving together. And they are prepared to change nothing. They just go on.
And they won't accept that the sanctions won't change Russia's quote unquote behavior, that demeaning language all the time. Yeah, because what they're doing is that they're denying reality.
Yes,
they see it inside their air-conditioned offices in Washington, D.C., in the swamp. And that is what ails the world so much. I mean, if you look at, there was a wonderful article in the American Conservative. The Chinese, their Road and Belt initiative is making it all the way to the Suez Canal. And what it is that even the global infrastructure of trade and movement of people and commerce is changing so fast in front of our eyes. Yes. But you wouldn't notice that in the mainstream media. It doesn't even exist. No. Okay? I mean, when you fly into an airport in the United States, as an American, you're embarrassed that it's so decrepit and falling apart. And then the newest airports in the world are in Eurasia. Okay, I mean, and they're beautiful. I mean, so much is going on. And then we get down to these really trivialized things. And this is what is so terribly wrong about the State Department. They can't reimagine that somehow the world is working in a different way. And that's going to be to their demise. And when it doesn't go their own way, they get aggressive. That's what's really scary.
Because that's where the money's at. The money's at is the money is where they've been doing what they've been doing for the past 70 years.
Yeah, I mean, and there's no downside.
That's what they're saying. Why change it?
And there's no downside to being wrong.
Yeah,
ever.
There's no downside. And we saw that on full display, guys. Did we not see it throughout the whole, Schiff impeachment hoax, the whole Ukraine thing, and Nadler, where he brought those 4 lawyers, 3 of which were just talking about, how they disagree with Trump's foreign policy. That Pamela Karlan, she was just saying, I don't like Trump's foreign policy. Everyone else that was in the Schiff trial, they weren't presenting evidence. They were upset with Trump because they didn't agree with the way he was handling Ukraine. That was the whole thing. It was their opinion as how they wanted Trump to handle Ukraine and Russia. We saw it on full display that the deep state and all these, bureaucrats are upset with Trump because during the campaign, way back in 2015-16, Trump committed the ultimate sin. He said, I would like to talk to Putin and Russia and reimagine, Peter. Trump actually did say, to his credit, that he perhaps would reimagine the world order. And he's been punished for it ever since. And let me, and to get your guys' thoughts on this, and then we'll go to the super chats. From Mark Fuller says, the best you can say about Trump's foreign policy is that Clinton would have been worse. And my fear on that is, how long can Trump hold out before the bureaucrats and the deep state and all these guys push him towards war? For him to say, because until now, to his credit, he has avoided war. Yeah. How long can he hold out there?
I think he will hold out until he's reelected. And then what could happen? Who knows?
What are your thoughts, guys, before we get to super chats?
Well, can I just, before we do that, talk about Kamala Karlan, because I thought that was one of the most terrifying pieces of testimony I have ever seen in Congress, because of course she conjures up again this, shining city on the hill rhetoric. I wish people would stop using that word, by the way. I think it does so much harm. But there you had it all, this ideological mindset, this dogma, which refuses to acknowledge facts. It denies facts. It insists upon the United States taking extreme positions and refusing ever to adjust them. And there are far too many people in the United States who are now caught up in all this rhetoric and in all of that mindset. And that is the community that Donald Trump is up against, and which he has completely failed to master. And yes, I agree with all the criticisms that have been made about Trump. He's not handled his immense powers as president with great skill, but we should never, ever underestimate the strength of the forces that are he's up against.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
Always there is this tug of war between the president and, if you like, let's call it the blob, people like Kamala Karlan and all those sort of people, the Vindmans, the Kents, the Taylors, all this, frankly, I think rather terrifying group of people. And we must hope that in the end, he will resist them. And we must also hope that he is able to resist them long enough for there to be a new day in the United States.
Well, I think a good sign is that he did fire John Bolton.
Well, indeed. But I mean, ultimately, as I said, Americans do still have mostly the right to vote. I understand the American electoral system is incredibly complicated and registering is not always easy. But Americans it's archaic. But Americans do have the right to vote. Most of them repeatedly say that they don't want wars, They are, war policies, belligerent policies never succeed. What they need to do is to make sure that a president and a Congress are elected that start to take that sentiment into account. Very difficult to do in the political system of the United States at the moment. But if they don't, then I don't personally think that we will see World War III or anything like that happening. I don't think even people like Kamala Khan are suicidal. But the US will become isolated, and eventually its political and economic position will collapse. Powers that base their policies not on reality, but on ideology, invariably in the end collapse.
Yeah, to put this all in a nutshell, is that the complete bipartisan, with the media giving it cover, assault on Tulsi Gabbard. That's all you have to know.
Yeah.
That's all you have to know. She doesn't want the Overton window to expand.
No.
We see, no, this is a dogma and you cannot violate it. Okay. I mean, it was premeditated. The Clinton machine went after her, which of course, these people are not the smartest people. And Tulsi, Kamala Harris isn't in the race, but Tulsi still.
I love how the media, Peter, Alexander, I love how the media now, just to close it up, is saying, oh my God, and Al Sharpton is getting out there saying, oh my God, we won't have any person of color now in the Democratic race. And I'm sitting there, I'm going, Tulsi Gabbard? What are you guys talking about?
A woman, a minority, a veteran. Oh my goodness, not attractive candidate, not at all. And you know what? This is our podcast, very attractive, physically attractive, and she has a beautiful voice and amazing poise, okay? And I probably disagree with her on everything except for foreign policy, okay? And I'd still, if she came to a venue close to me, I would go, not anyone else. I would go see Trump just to say I saw Trump. But the rest of them, okay. And they're like a gnat on a fly on the back of a rodent, okay? I mean, they're not serious people. Tulsi scares them to death for good reason.
Yeah, let's get to some super chats, guys. We can close it out. Let's see. I am on top of the world with my Novichok hat at the Duran and the Duran mug. Thank you, Alex, for your assistance. Novichok, there's a story that died out. Whatever happened to the scribbles?
I love this line, and everybody can use it. It was the biggest story in history until it wasn't.
Yeah, indeed. What has happened? Well, indeed, and interestingly enough, nothing about them during the election either. Nobody mentioned this.
Rabbit hole.
Anyway,
rabbit holeism. I just came up with a new phrase: rabbit holeism.
I've heard conflicting stories, by the way, about their whereabouts. 3 different ones. 1, they're dead. 2, they're in Canada, and 3, they're in an American airbase. That's all.
Peter, have you heard anything about the scribbles, Yulia, any of this stuff?
Big zero.
Well, can I just say, actually, again,
no, because
it's not really.
It served its purpose. It served its purpose. It doesn't matter if it happened.
Yeah.
It doesn't have. There's the fact that it has some veracity or not is unimportant in this day and age.
Yeah.
It's just that the impression has been made. That's the whole point of all of these stories, is to make an impression. MH17. It was the biggest story in the world until it wasn't.
Yeah.
Okay. The Duma attack. Biggest story in the world until it wasn't.
So it was debunked.
Over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Alexander, what happens in these cases in the UK? I mean, they're investigating something, aren't they? You have active police officers, active people investigating this. Does it just disappear? I mean,
right.
How does this work?
Actually, I'm glad we brought up the scribbles, because of course, I mean, there is a sort of preposterous aspect to all of this, but we must not forget the fact that we're talking about 2 human beings who have been disappeared.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know where they are. Their family has no knowledge about their whereabouts. That is actually an extremely disturbing fact. That's an extraordinary thing. And, it should worry all of us. I mean, we've talked about Julian Assange being kept in terrible conditions, which Niels Melzer, who's the UN rapporteur on torture, says amounts to torture. And we also have in the same country, which is my country, Britain, 2 people who have now been disappeared. So that's the first thing to say. Now, what has happened to the investigation? As far as I understand it, the investigation is in deadlock. And the reason it is in deadlock is, firstly, it didn't add up anyway. I mean, it never really made very much sense. But then a disaster happened, which is that this man, Charles Rowley, found this perfume bottle with the Novichok in it. Now, I don't want to go into the details of all of this. If you want to, there is a brilliant blog that has researched all this by a man called Rob Slane, who lives in Salisbury. His blog is called The Blogmire, and he's got there everything that you want to know about Skripals, and he's researched it brilliantly. But what I will say is this: it is impossible to fit in the discovery of this bottle into the sequencing of the story. It just doesn't add up. It is completely anomalous. It's clearly been planted there by someone. To what purpose and to what end? It's very difficult to say at the moment. But the result is that we have an investigation that is going nowhere, and which, in effect, we are not allowed or hear anything more about. That's where the state of the investigation is.
What does that even mean? We're not allowed to hear
or
talk about. I mean, it means crazy.
It means that the 2 people at the center of the story, as I said, have been disappeared. And as is anybody who's concerned about human rights and about people's lives should be extremely worried about it. I mean, that is an extraordinary thing. To give you an example, in Britain, there is always after a person dies, an unnatural death, there is always an inquest. An inquest is a judicial investigation by a court official called a coroner, who looks into the circumstances in which somebody has died and gives a preliminary view. This inquest into the person who died, this woman, Dawn,
homeless woman, yeah.
A homeless woman, who was sprayed with allegedly Novichok from this bottle. That inquest has been indefinitely delayed. No real explanation. And of course, a point which has been made by various people, we were talking about the OPCW and the collapse, the scandal in relation to Duma. Of course, it is the OPCW that is also involved in the Skripal affair, because they appear to have corroborated the findings that the British have made, that the bottle, that the substance that's allegedly poisoned the Skripals was this mysterious substance called Novichok. They never actually said that, but they appear to have done that. Well, if you can't trust the OPCW over Duma, how can you trust them on the Skripal affair? And there are people who are making that point. Lots of people. I should say something else, which is that, of course, if you're talking about the political stories, the news media, the mainstream media in Britain, they don't talk about Skripals very much anymore. There's supposed to be a BBC dramatization being prepared. Well, we haven't seen it, but dramatizations are always a duty. But on the internet, it's a different story. Lots of people are talking about it there. There, it's not been forgotten.
All right, let's get to super chats, guys. I think the whole Skripal thing is one big hoax. that's my take on it, Alexander. One big hoax.
A hoax though, in which, as I said,
how, why, in what form, I don't know.
How, why, and what for, and at the center of it, 2 people who, as I said, have been disappeared. I mean, that sort of thing happened in totalitarian states. It's now happening in Britain. As a British person, that concerns me.
All right. Mm-hmm. From Valley S, $20 super chat. Thank you, Valley, very much for that super chat. We appreciate it. From Penguins fan, super chat, $5 Canadian. WADA needs to be removed from Montreal, Quebec, Canada.
Well, indeed. I mean, I understand, by the way, that just over the last few minutes, the WADA seems to have slightly retreated. And they say that if they're provided access to the raw data, they might even consider reinstating Russia. So, let's not, this story is still ongoing.
WADA, the title is WADA leaves the door, I'm on RT right now. WADA leaves the door open for Russia ban to be lifted early if raw lab data is provided. And the next title is Russia will challenge WADA decision at top sports court. So
which is the two stories are connected, because, as I said, I think WADA is actually in a rather more precarious legal position than they were on the previous occasion. And it's important to say, ultimately they lost the Court of Arbitration for Sports just on the eve of the Olympics. Actually, the Winter Olympics reinstated an awful lot of Russian athletes. They said that the findings of the McLaren reports could not be relied upon as evidence. That's an important fact which people don't know. So what is in a more precarious legal position than is perhaps acknowledged. We will see where this goes.
All right, from Penguins fan, super chat. Russia needs to take WADA to international court. This is harassment.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I mean, definitely.
All right. Peter from Sparky, Justice Roberts is a complete deep state sellout.
Well, there are people that say that, okay? And there are a lot of people that say that you can't get that high in public life without being some kind of sellout, okay? I know some of the stories that are being told about Justice Roberts, and I don't want to really comment on them here because I want to be on firm ground, but I know what the person is talking about, obviously. But it's part of our rule here in these podcasts that we, when we do speculate, and we do a lot, but it's grounded, okay? So I'm not going to go into a defamation situation when it comes to Justice Roberts. What's most important here is how he's presided on the court and how he may preside over an impeachment procedure. And I commented on that. I think that if he doesn't see any fact witnesses that the Republicans want to present, then he's going to say, what's this all about? And that's a federal statute. Now, I want to reiterate again is that the Senate makes its own rules for impeachment, okay? Because it's a political process, all right? You could impeach the president of the United States for littering, and I'm not joking here, okay? I'm not joking. I mean, if you get enough people in your caucus and it's bipartisan, you can do it, okay? It's a political process, everyone. It's not a legal one.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the only thing I'm going to say about Roberts is I've also heard that, and I don't know about it, and I'm not going to comment about it because partly because I don't know about it. But what I will say is this: what I have seen of Roberts, reading his legal opinions and judgments, is that this is not a judge who makes waves. He's a very, very quiet, steady judge, perhaps not the kind of judge that you want in a great political situation like this. I think you perhaps need a rather more, shall we say, politically sophisticated person, and more of a jurist. He doesn't come across to be.
Well, he's not going to let anyone in the U.S. Senate, he's going to let anyone in the House of Representatives or the President of the United States soil the reputation of the Supreme Court. Well, I can guarantee you that.
Yeah.
All right, because that's why the third branch exists, is to arbitrate two querulous parties, okay? And if he sees it's not in the interest of the court, he will say so, irrespective of what you think of his past.
Yes.
Okay, from Scott Arbuckle, super chat, $20. Thank you for that super chat. Alexander, what part, if any, is the Greek Orthodox Church of Istanbul playing in the Ukrainian Biden situation? Interesting question.
I don't know that it is actually, but of course the point about we've discussed this on programs, and this is a difficult issue for me personally, because obviously the Patriarchate of Constantinople is something that both as an Orthodox Christian and as somebody who takes interest in Greek history is a hugely important institution. And of course it sided with the Maidan movement in Ukraine. It supported what I consider to be a schismatic church. I think an awful lot of people around in the Orthodox world do. And apparently it is ganging up with the State Department and, dare I say it, the Greek Foreign Ministry to try to put pressure on various other Orthodox churches around the world to agree and be part of it. That is, in my opinion, a major issue in and of itself. As to the Biden affair, I doubt that they're very heavily involved. I mean, why would they be, frankly?
Okay, from Sparky, a super chat. Barr would have gotten the Kavanaugh treatment during his Senate approval, Peter, if he was truly going to clean house and drain the swamp.
That's a bit premature right now. I suppose that will be a germane question depending on what he presents. Okay, that's a good preamble to a good question, but we have to, let's wait for the results. Okay. Yeah, a lot's on the line for Attorney General Barr. A lot is on the line for him. And you know what? He's not going to make anybody happy. That's not a situation anyone really wants. But he's done this before. He's here now. Trump gets reelected. He resigns. He's here for the duration. That's it. He has no ambitions. I'm on his side. I am. Yeah. But in politics, you got to learn one thing. You're never going to get everything you want. Okay, that's a sign of maturity. Yeah, I'm afraid.
I'm going to say this about Barr. I mean, first of all, I don't want to comment about his impeachment proceedings. His confirmation proceedings. I mean, bear in mind that he'd been Attorney General of the United States before, so there might have been problems about preventing him becoming Attorney General again. Also, he is undoubtedly superbly qualified as a lawyer for that job. He is a very, very good lawyer and jurist. But in terms of what he's done some things. He did bring the Mueller investigation to an end. I mean, everybody should be quite clear about this. If Barr had not been appointed Attorney General, if it had been left in the hands of people like Rod Rosenstein, we would still be waiting to get Mueller's report, because Mueller would have dragged it out, or rather Wiseman and all those people would have dragged it out right up to the election. And we would have all these usual stories being fed to the media about what, Mueller closing in and all the collusion. So Barr did bring that to an end. I mean, he made it very clear that he was skeptical about the whole operation. He thought the whole obstruction of justice thing was nonsense. And as a result, Mueller was ended. And that is an important thing. And Mueller and Barr has talked about spying. He did say that the Trump campaign was spied on, and he has appointed Duran to look into it. And he has gone to Rome and tried apparently to get to the bottom of what this mysterious Maltese professor, Joseph Mirsad, was up to. So let's not write Barr off yet. Let's wait and see.
Okay. From Harry C. Smith, a super chat. Breaking emergency, only just got here, but if you haven't discussed already, a massive New Zealand volcano exploding, at least 24 plus feared dead.
Wow.
Do you guys have any update on that, or
not
about an hour ago? So
not really. I've never seen an erupting volcano. I've been close to dormant ones, and including Vesuvius, and pretty terrifying things they are. I mean, one's thoughts are with the people who are.
And prayers are with the people in New Zealand. Absolutely, absolutely. From Sparky, a super chat. Kudos to Christo, Peter, and Alex have their beautiful groupies and fan clubs. That's you guys, Peter and Alexander. But Christo is the unsung hero of the Duran and its engines. Thank you. But actually, you guys that are watching us and have supported us are our keep us going. And you guys are taking us to 100K very soon.
Everybody knows that you're the workhorse here.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
No.
I echo Peter's words on that. I mean, can I just say, since we're there, I mean, the amount of work Alex puts in to keep behind the Duran, to keep the Duran going, and not just to make it going, but to make it a success, is prodigious. I'm amazed that there are enough hours in the day for him to do all the things he does.
I second the motion.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a fun journey, and we're just getting started, guys.
Yeah.
We're just getting started, and when we hit the 100K, we have a lot more things to launch into, a lot more good work. Yeah. So thank you to everyone that has supported us, watched us, liked our channel, subscribed, donated, Patreon, bought our merchandise. We really appreciate it. So thank you to everybody out there. Let's get moving to another super chat from Lord Brett Sinclair. Alexander, why are the UK media going after Andrew, in particular the Daily Mail, when they usually will do anything to protect the monarchy? Alexander, can I give you a theory that I read in one of our comments? I forgot who did it. It was a comment on the Epstein video. We did a video on Maxwell, the father, and how he was going up against Murdoch, correct?
You absolutely, yes.
Do you think the Daily Mail, which is Murdoch, if I'm not mistaken?
No, it's not.
No, it's not. Okay,
not
so my theory is not correct.
No,
I was thinking maybe it's, lingering from that ongoing feud of the Maxwell dynasty.
It's not entirely impossible because, of course, I mean, people like people who have operated or who have connections with Rupert Murdoch find themselves in all sorts of newspapers. I mean, Murdoch has a massive, massive influence in the media in Britain, which extends beyond the newspapers and TV stations he actually controls. But as to why the Daily Mail has gone after Andrew, well, I am not sure. I was surprised myself because there is no more monarchist and royalist newspaper in Britain than the Daily Mail. All I would say is that the fact that the Daily Mail has done it gives an indication to our viewers of what a huge story this Andrew's interview
episode
is in this country. I mean, Andrew made a disastrous mistake going on to television and giving that absolutely catastrophic interview. I mean, it has put him in an impossible position, and it has done the royal family and the monarchy great damage.
Well, the Queen canceled his birthday celebration, so he's in the doghouse.
Oh, he certainly is. Yeah, he might find himself, Peter, in a much worse place than just the doghouse.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Okay, guys, I got about 5 minutes left.
We're moving through the super chats. Peter from David, can someone explain to me why we are reading a transcript of the Trump phone call? Even in Nixon's time, there was a tape.
No, as far as I understand, they do not tape them. That's why they have a number of people transcribe. A number of people are listening, and they do their own transcript, and then they collate it together. Okay, so I think it's because foreign dignitaries and heads of state don't want it recorded. They want to have a private conversation, and this is done for the president as a record, but it's not supposed to be. I mean, you can go both ways. I mean, Trump released the transcript to spite the Democrats and the liberal media, but in principle, I'm very uneasy that he did that. Okay, because there's a lot of conversations and transcripts that I would like to hear now. Okay, George W. Bush's cajoling people into the illegal war against Iraq, Bill Clinton cajoling people in its illegal attack on Serbia. We could go on and on and on. Yeah. Trump's conversations with Lindsey Graham and others about the illegal coup takeover in Venezuela. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. Okay, so this is a very dangerous, I have to say, precedent here. It was a card up Trump's sleeve, but nobody in Washington really thinks these things through very much,
Peter is absolutely right. This is a disastrous precedent. The idea that a foreign leader now has to worry if he or she calls the president of the United States, that all their comments and statements are going to be released in the media as part of a partisan political quarrel in the United States is going to have a chilling effect on the conduct of diplomacy. And I mean, it is a very bad thing, an extremely bad thing that this has happened, and Zelensky himself has been seriously embarrassed about it. But can I just say about tape recordings, I've heard two things. Firstly, from what I understand, Peter's absolutely right. World leaders would be very hesitant about telephoning the President of the United States if they felt their words were being recorded. I mean, it doesn't generally happen. Even when Churchill and Roosevelt, for example, spoke to each other during the war, there was no actual recording of what they said to each other for that very reason, that people want to be able to speak freely and openly to each other. But over and above and beyond all of this, it seems one of the reasons why there is not officially, because we don't know what actually happens unofficially or informally, but why there is officially no recordings of any conversations, be they on the phone or elsewhere in the White House, is because of Richard Nixon and what he did. Presidents and their officials do not want to be caught on tape in the way that Nixon was. And there's been a sort of universal acceptance that after the Supreme Court in the Watergate case said that those tapes needed to be handed over and that executive privilege did not apply to them, no president wants to be in that kind of situation again.
Yeah, okay. And let's be very clear. I mean, I'm a real history nerd here. I mean, the court heard that Nixon had committed a crime in those recordings, and that's why they demanded him release it. It wasn't about executive privilege, because committing a crime and hiding behind executive privilege was the problem there, not executive privilege itself.
But presidents commit crimes all the time.
All the time.
They do so, and they do so routinely. It just happens that in this particular case that we've been talking about, Ukraine case, that was the exception. There doesn't seem to be.
And since we're on it, and I have a few minutes left here, you guys, quid pro quo is the blood life of politics. Everywhere, all the time, all through history.
Yeah.
Okay? This is childish. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's always quid pro quo, all the time, 24/7. So don't, these people are just so idiotic and immature. Anyway, got that off my
Okay,
chest.
so David, who asked the initial question, I'm going to jump a little bit ahead because he has a follow-up super chat. So I just want to get to that while we're on the subject. David says, but the conversation obviously was not private.
Well,
it never is private.
It's never private, no. But as I said, there is a difference between actually having people putting together.
Well, I mean, it's yes and no. That's a yes and no, answer to that, because it is private, but a record is made for the President of the United States, not for Zelensky. I mean, it's if his people want to do it, that's their business, okay? And they probably did, okay? But the point is that it is a private conversation, and the president has a record made of his private conversation for his own reference, okay? And with the understanding that it will never be released to the public. And now that precedent has been destroyed, and I don't think the phone is ringing off the hook in the White House now because of this.
Yes. Well, quite. I mean, Peter's right. It's not transcript exactly. It's what we call in England an attendance note. Yeah, and that's perhaps a more.
You guys always have cool terms for stuff. I like.
We did, don't we?
It's kind of like minutes. I mean, a more simplistic view is kind of when you have a meeting and someone's taking the minutes and they're writing down what was said, and then everyone agrees.
Yes.
When the minutes are completed, everyone agrees. Yes, that's what we talked about.
Yeah.
Okay. From Sparky, a super chat. Alexander, Pompeo is loyal to Trump on the surface, but is a snake in the grass. He and his ally, Gina Haspel, sneak and conspire to derail Trump's foreign policy.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and apparently they played a big role in persuading Trump to impose, to expel lots and lots and lots of Russian diplomats.
Over those ducks.
Over those ducks, the ducks and the children who had been
Duckgate,
which wasn't true. So I mean, deeply manipulative people, and I mean, one has to say this. I mean, Trump gets a lot of criticism for the fact that he goes to cable news and things like that. But why shouldn't he? Who can he trust around him? The other thing is, one of the things, I just want to say this again, because a point which I've seen repeatedly made, that Trump doesn't trust his intelligence agencies and never has.
No, he doesn't.
Well, of course he doesn't when they try to frame him. The very first meeting he had with them,
Yep.
before he even became president, they produced to him Christopher Steele's dossier, which he knows isn't true. So why should he believe anything?
I have a theory.
Yeah.
You know, there was a Newsweek writer that got the Thanksgiving Day story wrong, saying that Trump was going to tweet and play golf when actually he went to Afghanistan. Yeah. And but my theory is that Trump indeed plays a lot of golf. And it's the only time he can actually talk to someone privately. Yeah. That's why he does it. He goes out there and he puts his arm around and kind of whispers into an ear, because it's the only time someone's not listening to him. Yeah. Okay. Maybe it's crazy, but it makes perfect sense.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. All right. Super chat from David, $10. Peter, Trump has little chance of getting the U.S. out of Afghanistan. The permanent government refuses to allow it. Just look at our weird relationship with Pakistan. Remember, frenemy.
Yep. Exactly. He's treading water in this area, and I'll tell you an important reason why is because foreign policy has been taken out of the national conversation. Now, if it's about the wall or the dreamers or pharmaceutical prices, that actually is debated among a lot of people. But foreign policy has been taken out of the national conversation, and it's been given to the Lieutenant Colonels Vittmans and Fiona Hill. These people are the ones that determine it. And that's why there's never a debate about it. Even though poll after poll after poll say, get out of these wars. And then it was a few weeks ago, a searing poll result came about, is that the majority of veterans say it wasn't worth it. These wars weren't worth it. I mean, that is breaking news, but it isn't, because it's not part of the national conversation. It's not allowed to be part of the national conversation. And that's why those pinheads in front of Schiff and Adler, that's why they hate Trump so much, because it's none of his business. That's how they feel about it.
All right. And on that point, Alexander Dan Noyes has a super chat exactly on the point that Peter made, with those bureaucrats saying it's about money. They will kill the Constitution, violate laws, trample rights to protect their money.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they have a...
Well, and their power and their influence. It's not just pure money, okay? Because these people have oversized egos, okay? Yeah. Oversized. This like Kent guy, believe me, he's not overpaid. These people all have attitudes that they feel that they're masters of the universe, are not respected, and they're not given great pensions and all of that. That's part of their angst. I met many foreign service officers, okay? They're small-minded people, most of them.
Well, indeed. And of course, they possess huge power, and the power they get from their positions inevitably is going to reinforce the convictions they have, which led them to being appointed to those positions. This is one of the things, by the way, if you work in a bureaucracy, you always find is that people have a vested interest in believing the dogma. So there is material interests. There are interests of prestige and social standing. I mean, the ability, to go to important receptions in Georgetown and be received there as the great State Department official. And then, of course, there is obviously material benefits, but there's also ideology. I mean, it all combines in.
Reinforces.
It reinforces. And of course, the other thing which has become very disturbing about all of this is that they're also very heavily involved, very heavily implicated with some of the politicians as well.
Okay, I think Peter's battery might have gone.
Well, I think I'm afraid so.
Let's see, I think he'll come back. Let's see if he plugs in.
Yeah, you managed it, Peter.
No. I just hit the wrong button.
We're good. All right, let's move.
I'm on fumes. Right
Okay, great. We see you and we hear you. So let's go to Peter then, since you're back, from Dan as well. We don't have a government. We have a seagoing rat ship. We must eliminate gotcha government. The FBI must be dismantled. The CIA must be dismantled. The IRS must be dismantled.
Let me just answer this in a very broad brush way. We have to reimagine governance, okay? I really believe that, okay? Because so much of governance now is for the people that are doing the governing, not for the governed. And we need to reimagine it. And it's not that, in theory, it shouldn't be very hard, but for I'll just go back to the answer that Alexander Mikiris just gave us. There's so many vested personal ideological interests that is a barrier to reimagining governance, okay? And I'm a pessimist on this one.
Okay, Alexander from Sparky. Lindsey Graham's very clever. Unfortunately, he'll always put the military-industrial complex ahead of everything, including President Trump's agenda.
I think that's true.
I think it's true. I'm not sure how clever really he is, actually. He's a skillful politician. But whether he is particularly clever, I don't know. What this needs, what this situation needs is not intelligence so much as integrity. And
there's a real deficit of that
supply in Washington. So we'll see where he jumps and what he does.
Okay, Peter from Sparky. Super chat, Pompeo's behind Trump's failure to help Assange.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely, yes.
It was Pompeo that said that WikiLeaks should be designated as a foreign terrorist organization. Yeah, Pompeo.
In fact, he said that it was a private intelligence agency.
There you go.
And he's in the indictment.
Yep.
The American indictment. Those very words are there.
Well, yeah, and here's the same guy that, is a sycophant. I mean, a disgusting one at that. And he's eyeing a seat, if I'm not mistaken, Nebraska Senate seat. So, I mean, he's going to jump ship soon. Thank God.
All right. From Lord Brett Sinclair, 5-year super chat. Alexander, Boris has left himself some wiggle room with military unification with the EU, but won't say he will drop it. Your thoughts, please.
Well, I think the trouble with Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, is that, and it's become an issue in the election, he leaves himself wriggle room all the time because you cannot ever really rely on anything that he says. So he may rule something out entirely, and he may yet nonetheless do it. I still find it astonishing. He went along to the Northern Irish, the Ulster Unionist Party, attended their conference, assured them that there would be no customs barrier down the Irish, down the Irish Sea, and then went off a few days later and agreed with the European Union.
Cut them off.
Precisely that. So, I mean, this is the kind of person you are dealing with. And it says an awful lot, by the way, about the state of our politics in Britain, that this is the man who we're likely to re-elect as our Prime Minister on Thursday. But there we are.
All right, Peter from Edward Turner, Australia, $50. The Space Force plan is gaining enthusiasm from the war party. It seems to be slipping under the MSM radar. Do you have any comments on this?
Oh, it's a real trough for a lot of people. The interesting thing is that this is an amazing way to make enormous sums of money on things that don't even work. Okay, none of this stuff has been proven to work. I mean, we go back to the Star Wars, Reagan's Star Wars. How much money did they spend on that? It didn't work. I mean, and a lot of their military equipment today doesn't work anyway. Okay, they force people to buy it. Okay, it's not just because it's the best. It's politics here. So this is just another feeding trough, wasted taxpayer money. And, we need an enemy. Russia would be a good one, okay? Russia would be a good one. China, okay? Oh, yeah, so, they start investing in this, and what does it do? It militarizes space. So everybody has to get into it. This is such a lose-lose situation for us, average people, but for a very, very narrow set of interests. This is another feeding trough, a feeding frenzy, okay? And all it does is make the world unsafe.
Absolutely. Can I just make a general observation here? I mean, we've seen one arms control treaty, the core arms control treaties, which were negotiated at the end of the 60s and at the beginning of the 70s, all of them fall by the wayside. We've seen the ABM treaty go, we've seen the INF treaty go, we are hearing that the Open Skies treaty is about to go. There's now talk that the Outer Space Treaty is also going to go, and possibly START is also going to go. And there is no political activism in the West, in Europe and in North America fighting this thing. You see no protests. It's not a big issue anywhere.
Because it's not part of the national conversation.
Well, indeed, it's stopped being. And I have to say this also, and I'm not a climate change denier or skeptic or any of those things, but it does concern me that a lot of the political energy is now being, which ought to be going into, resisting this drive towards increasing nuclear militarization, which is extremely dangerous, is being diverted into this climate change issue. So we have people protesting and blocking roads in London because they think that the climate is going to collapse on us in 20 years. And they seem to be completely oblivious to the fact that we are now talking about all kinds of dangerous ideas with nuclear weapons and with space weapons and with all sorts of things. And I have to say this, I personally see the nuclearization, the new arms race that we're effectively in, as frankly more urgent and more dangerous.
That's so true. And like this Open Skies Treaty, it's in the US's interest to stay in that agreement. You know why? Because Russia is such a big place.
Yeah.
Okay, they lose on security, just out of primitive ideological obsession. Okay, it boggles the mind. I say that a lot these days.
20 years,
All right,
Alexander, 20 years. The climate now is going to collapse in 8 years. Those are the
8
latest
years,
reports.
8 years then, but
and if it does, we'll be reporting it here.
But let me be a little bit, let me make a jump a little, be a bit speculative. Is it a coincidence that we have all this climate alarmism going on at the same time as the entire nuclear arms control system is being shredded? I don't think it is, actually. And I do wonder whether some of the people who perhaps don't want us to look at the arms control crisis that we are looking at are perhaps quietly lending their hand to some of the climate protests. Now, I may be going a bit too far in making these things, and I don't want to deny the idealism of many of the people involved, but I do come back to what I said. I really do think that having militarization of space is far more dangerous than what's going to happen to the climate in 8 years' time, when I confidently predict it will be very much like it is today.
All right, let's move through the super chats, guys. Let's move through
them.
On.
Okay,
yeah, we're trying.
Black out. Okay.
Yeah, we're trying. We still got a few more left, Peter. Sparky says to Alexander, Boris claims the Benn Act tied his hands, but he didn't advise Her Majesty, the Queen, not to sign it. Why won't any interviewer ask him about this invalid excuse?
Oh, excellent question. I mean, lots of questions that should have been asked to Boris, and they're not being asked. I mean, I really, this election that we have gone through has been a completely dismal affair, and no real questions have been asked, and he's avoided, to the best extent that he can, sitting to any real interviews. I mean, one of the most bizarre things about the election is that the Conservatives will probably win, and Boris Johnson will probably be our new Prime Minister, or rather re-elected Prime Minister. But the Conservatives are barely campaigning because they are hiding behind the fact that they got a Brexit plan, and they're hiding behind the fact that people don't like Jeremy Corbyn very much. But they are not being They're not being questioned on points like that. And it's very bad that they're not being.
Okay, from Jake Krubug, Alex and Alexander, can you comment on the worsening situation with the Orthodox Church and the ecumenical patriarch's actions?
Well, there's so much to say about this. We would need, I think, to do another program. Perhaps we should. But I mean, there is a battle underway within the Orthodox Church over this issue about the schismatic Ukrainian church. And this is the background to that is an even greater battle that's been going on for decades between the patriarchates of Moscow and Constantinople, because Constantinople, for historic reasons, is the senior patriarchate, the ecumenical patriarchate, but the vast majority of Orthodox believers are aligned with Moscow. So these two big patriarchs, these two great patriarchs, are slugging it out between them. And it's bad for the Orthodox world. It's bad, if I may say so, for Greece. And, you know, that's a big issue to discuss. This is something that we would need, I think, to do a proper video on, and perhaps we should, Alex.
Okay, Peter from Dam Noyes. Roberts has already soiled the Supreme Court. Just read his Obamacare decision. This could be his chance for redemption. Whether or not he has the integrity to do so, we'll see.
Okay, I'll go back to, depending on the rules that the Senate sets for itself during this impeachment process. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, okay?
Okay, Alexander from Penguins fan, super chat update on Idlib in Syria.
Well, quiet again. I understand it's always the way with Syria at the moment. I mean, what I think is happening is that the focus has gone back towards the actions in this so-called constitutional committee with Putin and Erdogan. By the way, they just spoke again recently, and it looks as if they may be meeting up. Well, they will be meeting up again soon. Putin is going to Turkey on the 8th of January to celebrate the opening of Turk Stream. And you can be absolutely sure that Syria will be discussed, and Idlib will certainly be discussed. The Syrians have retaken quite a lot of Idlib now.
Okay, Peter from Penguins fan, Russia should put S-400s near a U.S. base in Syria, and they should put one in Damascus.
They don't need to, okay? They don't need to, and it hasn't been requested by the Syrian government, okay? So that would be deemed as provocative and unnecessarily so. I have to remind everyone that Russia has actually diplomatic statecraft. Yeah, it does, and it's very sophisticated, extremely sophisticated, and it is very careful in the moves it makes. The bravado that would show, that would, you know, we could beat our chest and, you know, oh wow, you know, but it's not necessary. The war has come to an end. All right. And what's going on in Syria? I don't hear very much. That's good, because that means they're taking brick by brick, street by street, you know, of Idlib, and just wearing this down. And Erdogan knows he's going to have to do it. So that's the good news. When you don't hear a lot about Syria, that's good.
Okay, Alexander from Penguins fan, you had kind of answered this update on Nord Stream 2 and Turk Stream 2. You kind of hinted at, Alexander, that Putin's going to be meeting Erdogan.
Absolutely. He's going there on the 8th of January. So this is going to be a major event in Turkey.
Oh, yeah, but will it be reported in Western media?
Well, it won't. Well, there is some mumblings of reportings about
well, I can imagine.
I mean, the fact that all these pipelines have all been built and finished simultaneously, the Power of Siberia pipeline to China, the Turk Stream to Turkey, and Nord Stream is almost finished. Nord Stream 2 is almost finished to Germany. All of this happening at the same time has actually been something of a shock to some people. I mean, they never thought any of this would happen. So, you know, here we are.
Two words. Checkmate.
Well, indeed. Yeah.
Okay, from K Scott, 14.99 super chat. Thank you guys for your work. Thank you, Kay, for that super chat. And from Sparky Peter, except for Tony Blair and Bill Browder, I'd let all the globalists go if only Hillary is made an example of and is convicted of crimes against humanity. From Sparky.
Well, it's a very passionate question. No, I'm going to be more of a purist here. Put them all in prison. Okay.
All right, Alexander, super chat from Little Gray Alien. What do you make of Macron's gain among center-right and right voters in France?
Well, it's what he's trying to do. He is trying to reposition himself to appeal to these voters because he thinks that the left is basically sewn up in France, that it's basically bankrupt, politically bankrupt. There's been moves against the so-called leader of the left, Mélenchon, in France now, and he's failed to make much of an impact. So this is very much Macron's opportunism. I don't think he's going to succeed. I mean, he's made some gains, but what I'm hearing is that on the right, he's made some gains on the right. What I'm hearing is that Le Pen is now outpolling him. So bear in mind that he outpolled her before. If she's now outpolling him, it doesn't seem to me as if he's making very much ground.
Okay, Peter, how are you doing on time?
I black out any second.
I've got 3 super chats addressed to you, so let me fire them
real
off
quick.
From Harry. Peter, I learned that in early 2000s, Russia paid off IMF loans for all 15 CIS countries, over 100 billion, as well as wiping debts owed to it by third world countries, another 100 billion. Is this true?
Yes, but it was to the Paris Club. But yes, Russia has no significant outstanding foreign debt. So that's true.
Okay, from David. Peter, really wish you'd do a story on Ambassador Robin Raphael, Lady Taliban.
Okay, thank you. I'll take it on board. Certainly, why not?
Okay, and from Magnesia Shad. Agree with you, Peter. I'll order Tulsi at the restaurant at the end of the universe.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. And you know what, you guys? I mean, she's a liberal. I'm not, okay? But she's young. She's young. And you know what? Oh, here we go. I'm almost gone.
Okay, you keep on going. You know what? We can hear you.
Okay, all right. Okay, yeah. It's warning me. You know?
Okay.
I just hope that she can become part of the national conversation after this election. I think that would be really great.
Okay, and one more,
right.
Peter. According to Lavrov, NATO is seeking to become a world domination organization. What is your take on this?
Yes, I read that article 15 minutes before we started this. Yes, I'm very familiar with that. And I totally agree with it. Is that NATO for the United States is to displace the United Nations. That's what they're trying to do. Yeah. This goes back to John McCain's A League of Democracies, okay, which is Orwellian, okay? And what they want to do is they want to displace the United Nations, and they want to have it in an organization that has a military arm, and that is obviously NATO. That's why they're pulling in Montenegro and Macedonia and all these other things, because what they want to do is create a bloc, okay? It's not based on values or ideas. It's based on power.
All right, Alexander from Penguins fan. On Serbia, there's a pro-NATO and EU party. Do they even know what NATO did to them in '99? And yet they are pro-West.
Oh, that's absolutely true. And yet they are pro-West. That's a very, very good question. There is a very strong Europeanist element within Serbia. It exists. It always has. It was instrumental in carrying out the Color Revolution regime change operation, which brought down Milosevic. One should not assume that all Serbs are pro-Russian and anti-globalist and all of those things. Can I just actually add to something that Peter said about the League of Democracies idea? I mean, there is being an idea which is being floated around, and I've seen it spoken about in Britain. I actually read an article about this in the Telegraph recently, which is that, of course, give NATO a global role. In other words, it's no longer confined to Northern Europe. Introduce countries like Australia, New Zealand, places well outside the North Atlantic area, into NATO, and direct it now as much against China as against Russia. And I think this is really the kind of thinking that Lavrov is picking up on, and which he's talking about when he talks about NATO converting itself into a world hegemony operation. But, you know, these are the times we live in, and coming back to the question, there are people in Serbia who would be fully on board with that.
Okay, Alexander, Peter's battery has gone out, but we'll finish off the rest of the super chats. Everyone's in good hands with the Oracle of London. Alexander McCurse. Alexander, Penguins fan, the Russia-China pipeline, Russian liberals saying this will not benefit Russia.
Well, they've been saying that from the first moment. I mean, if I may say so, and this is something which I always say about this, I was actually in St. Petersburg at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, together with Peter Lavelle, when Putin announced this pipeline, with a member of the Politburo, the Chinese Politburo there. We were both there when it happened. And, I remember we were both talking about it afterwards, and we were saying to each other that there'll be all sorts of people who will say it will never happen, that it's uneconomic, that it serves Chinese interests rather than Russian interests. And unfortunately, you will hear that all the time. But I mean, I don't think there's any doubt at all that the reason liberals are talking in this way is because, as far as they are concerned, this is something they don't want to happen, because they don't really want Russia aligned with China. They want Russia aligned with the United States.
Okay. From Neurosurgery Highland, 1499 super chat. Thank you for that super chat. From Sparky, super chat. Alexander, building up Space Force could replace war, at least for a time, and satisfying the military-industrial complex financial needs. Maybe a good thing? Question mark.
I don't think so. I think it's an extremely dangerous and very bad idea. And I think that always, whenever you hear of military escalations, people always talk about this securing peace. I don't think it ever really does. That's my own personal view.
Okay, from Penguins fan, Israel just tested its nuclear weapons. What do you guys think of that?
Well, I haven't heard that. But of course, Israel has a nuclear arsenal. How big it is and how powerful it is, I don't know. But Israel has always had nuclear weapons, and they are a danger and a threat and a destabilizing factor in the Middle East. What Israel needs to do, and I've said this many times, is it needs to seek peace with its Arab neighbors and with the people, the Arab people, the Palestinian people, with whom it shares the former British Mandate territory of Palestine. What Israel has been doing instead is seek victory and pursue through that victory maximalist objectives within the British Mandate territory of Palestine. And that is inherently destabilizing and very dangerous. And adding nuclear weapons to that mix does not make Israel safer. It just makes the whole thing much more dangerous.
Okay, from Jonathan Gillespie, super chat. Saw on Zero Hedge last night that near half of U.S. military saw Russia as an ally. Speaks volumes to how hard the CIA Cold War II narrative is failing.
Well, I agree. I have to say, it didn't surprise me. I've always felt that within the uniformed military, and of course within the sort of rank and file uniformed military, there is probably a much clearer understanding of the realities of the world than there is than you will ever find inside the Beltway.
Okay. From Sparky, a super chat. Would-be peaceniks are kept busy with climate hoax.
Well, I've said something like that earlier in our program. I want to make this very clear. I am not a scientist. I am not able to assess objectively all this climate information. I'm becoming more skeptical about it, that's all.
You should be more skeptical. Yes, yeah. I think we all are becoming more skeptical about it. I'll just leave it at that. Neurosurgery Highland, the 1999 super chat. You think impeachment is to get more people involved to ultimately heal tension by manufacturing consent for war with Iran? Interesting question.
It's a very interesting question. I don't think so. Ultimately, it seems to me that the whole impeachment thing is dividing America and is polarizing it. And I doubt very much that a war with Iran, if it comes, will unite America. I think that the passions of this impeachment affair have basically spun out of control. I mean, the kind of people I meet, some people I meet, and the way they talk about Trump, I have to say, I mean, it baffles me. It just bewilders me. I find it very, very strange to hear the kind of things people say about Trump. They seem to me so extreme and so unbalanced and so frankly crazy that I don't really understand them very well. And I don't think you can contain that or control it simply by having a war with Iran. On the contrary, I predict if there is a war with Iran, it will eventually lead to all these issues becoming even more extreme and even more polarized. Anyway, that's my view.
Okay, from Penguins fan, Kurds are useless. They went back to the US instead of the Syrian government.
Well, I think that the quality of Kurdish political leadership in Syria has been extremely poor. And I think that they should have been much more careful about getting involved with the US. And I think that getting involved with the US to the extent that they did simply offended and annoyed the Russians. And they should have realized right from the beginning that the US was using them and that they would never really succeed in being able to use the US. So I predict that eventually they will be left high and dry by the US, and they will then discover that trying to sort of work even more closely with the US isn't working for them. I mean, it's incredible that they still haven't grasped this after all that has happened.
Okay, from Penguins fan, this one's right down your alley, Alexander. Where is the Russia economy right now compared to the EU? Will the EU lift sanctions?
Well, the EU won't lift sanctions anytime soon. I think that's a given, and I don't think the Russians wanted to lift sanctions anytime soon. We did a program about the Russian economy recently. They've had lower growth this year because largely, in my opinion, because the Russian central bank overestimated absurdly and insanely overestimated the inflation dangers this year, and they increased interest rates last year in the face of a rapidly growing economy. So that slowed the economy down, and it means that inflation has massively undershot the central bank's own target. But I predict that next year we're going to see a significant growth pickup. Apparently disposable incomes have grown this year. There's been some talk about how disposable incomes in Russia have been falling back. Actually, they grew in 2018 and they've grown this year. And I think on the basis of that, on the strength of that, we will see higher growth in Russia next year. The productive parts of the economy, agriculture and manufacturing and industry, have been doing quite well. They've been growing at a good clip. Industry, interestingly, Russian manufacturing has been growing even at the same time as it's been declining or contracting almost everywhere else, including in Germany, Japan, the United States, and China.
Okay, from Penguins fan, the Young Turks and other liberals are smearing Tulsi Gabbard because of her ties to Modi and India.
Well, I'm going to say straight away, I have issues with, I'm getting extremely concerned about Modi's conduct in India and the kind of things that are going on in India. And I'm hearing lots of things from Indian friends, of whom I have several, and who are not people who would be taking a straightforward view about this, which are concerning to me. But I don't think you should judge Tulsi Gabbard as a US citizen of Indian origins simply because she wants to be apparently close to the prime minister of her own original country. I mean, I think Tulsi Gabbard goes far beyond all of this issue, and I think again, people like the Young Turks are basically throwing anything they can at Tulsi Gabbard. You know, he's an Assad apologist. He's a Russian agent. She's a Russian agent. Hillary Clinton said that also. And now it seems she's implicated in Modi's things.
Yeah. TYT Alexander is probably the worst place to go to for.
Well, I don't.
For geopolitics, there.
To be honest, I don't. I gave up on them.
They're not the place to go.
The last program of theirs I ever watched, this is a horrible and delicious admission, was the one that they gave directly during the November 2016 presidential election.
Yeah, they believe in Russiagate.
Yeah,
their argument for Russiagate and that Trump is a Russian agent is because the sanctions that Putin was going to have the sanctions lifted by Trump. So that was the whole backing of Trump there, which is, if anyone knows anything about Russia, which you can debunk in about 10 seconds, is complete nonsense.
Well, it's complete nonsense, and I mean the whole thing was it's just ridiculous. And of course, I mean the fact is, I mean, why are we even talking about this anymore? Because I said even Mueller couldn't find it, but the Russians never believed that he would lift the sanctions anyway, and the idea that they were prepared to help Donald Trump in order to get him to lift the sanctions is a nonsense, because they were adapting their economy to dealing with the sanctions. Exactly. The Russian economy has actually successfully coped with the sanctions. So why would they be doing the one if they were counting on the other? It assumes a degree of desperation, economic desperation, on the part of the Russians, which never existed. It just didn't exist.
Yeah. I remember real quick, Alexander, I remember in 2010, when Papandreou in Greece was going to launch the memorandum, the austerity on the Greek people. I remember Erdogan had a visit to Greece, and he told Papandreou, he said, use this opportunity of austerity and all of this stuff that the EU is now going to put on you in order to make changes. Yeah. To make, just throw it on the EU when you have to, cut pensions or raise taxes, whatever you have to do. Yeah. Use it as an opportunity. And so listening to you, I think that the sanctions was a great opportunity for Putin in a way, and the Putin government to say, we're going to make changes. We've got all these outside forces attacking us. We're going to blame it on them, but we're going to make these necessary changes to decouple from the Western financial system.
I think that's exactly what happened. And
Greece didn't pull it off, but
Russia did. Well, they did it, and they did it very systematically and very methodically. I mean, we've discussed this many times on our programs, but I mean, we've already talked about the pipelines they built, the financial system they've created, the alternative to SWIFT they've created, the import substitution programs, the support for agriculture, all of these things. Why would they waste their time trying to get some, a property tycoon like Trump elected to the White House, whom everybody thought would lose, when they're doing all of these things and doing them successfully? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. It never added up.
Yeah, all right, let's finish it out. Alexander from Penguins Fan, what is Alexei Navalny up to?
Well, what is indeed Alexei Navalny up to? I mean, I would say this. I am frankly, well, I'm not going to say I'm bored by Alexei Navalny, but the important thing to understand about him is that he is not a significant personality in Russia. What he does is that every so often he tries to stage demos in Moscow, and those demos that he does, they're always called in illegal venues to cause the maximum disruption and to get himself and other people arrested, which will then make headlines around the world, but doesn't impress many people in Russia. And at the same time, he's active, spreading stories about corruption in high places. Some of it's true, most of which, by the way, all of the important corruption cases that Navalny has identified, I've tried to follow the threads, and I've not really been convinced by them, because he never goes after the sort of people who there are in Russia who, in my opinion, really are corrupt. I mean, he goes after people like Prime Minister Medvedev, who I don't think is corrupt, and he doesn't look at, say, some of the big oligarchs, the big financial oligarchs, who are still there in Russia and who are still, important and have very dodgy histories. Those are not the sort of people that Navalny goes after at all. But frankly, I think his star has faded. I don't think he is an important person within Russia anymore. There were some protests in Moscow this summer. All kinds of people were trying to write them up as being part of this great wave of protests that was supposed to be taking place. They're all connected with local elections that took place in Moscow. The local elections came and went. The same party, United Russia, gained the majority that it always does, and it's all been forgotten already.
Okay, from Raccoon, Super Chat, is Hillary still alive?
No, I think so. I think she's alive, and unfortunately, she's alive and well, and unfortunately, she's apparently still planning to become president, which it seems amazing to me, but there we are.
Unfortunately, if it's not Hillary Clinton, whoever is planning to become president,
Yeah.
oh boy, making a big mistake by running again, whoever that lady is.
Yeah.
All right, from Raccoon, another super chat, a big thumbs up, Alexander. That's a super chat. Thank you very much, Raccoon.
you.
From Penguins fan, the last two. From Penguins fan, Canada changed their foreign minister. Chrystia Freeland is no more. We did a video on this.
Well, we did indeed. I mean, she's not no more. She is deputy prime minister. But as we discussed in that video, becoming deputy prime minister in the Westminster system, which is the one that Canada has, may not actually mean very much. There are still some people apparently who want Chrystia Freeland to become the new prime minister, to be Justin Trudeau's successor. We shall see. I can't believe it. And the person who's taken over, Francois-Philippe Champagne, seems to have a radically different global perspective to the one that she has. He seems to be a much more mainstream Canadian foreign minister in the kind of diplomatic tradition that Canada has followed. So I hope that we will see a shift in the way Canada conducts its affairs.
Okay, and finally, Alexander, we started with WADA, we'll finish with WADA. From Penguins fan, this WADA decision is a disgrace. Russia needs to take them to court.
Well, I mean, Russia is taking them to court. It is taking them to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and we'll see what happens there. Now, I think, and it's been talked about many times, and I think the Russians actually missed a trick here before. I think that there are possible civil claims, because the Court of Arbitration for Sport, I should say, is a court that was set up by the International Olympic Committee. Its decisions are persuasive rather than binding. It's not an official court which operates within any legal system. It's more like an arbitration tribunal, if you like. But I think that the Russians could and should have brought civil claims against all sorts of people during the earlier part of the Russian doping scandal in actual formal courts around the world. They didn't do that. We will see whether they will this time.
Okay, that is it. 3 hours, Alexander.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
The
3
longest,
hours.
I think,
We had a lot to discuss.
But we had a huge amount to discuss. And again, as I said, I mean, you know, our viewers, we've said this actually many times. I mean, we have wonderful questions from you. I mean, they keep us going and we enjoy them immensely.
Great questions. Thank you
Great
to Peter
questions.
Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk in Moscow. Thank you, Peter, for a great live stream. Alexander Mercouris, the Oracle of London in London. Alexander, what are you looking out for this week?
Well, on Thursday, we have the elections in Britain. And of course, that's an important election because one, we'll see whether or not Boris Johnson's Brexit plan will happen. And, you know, whether or not we have a Boris Johnson majority government, which I predict we will, by the way, or whether we will have a hung parliament, or whether Jeremy Corbyn will manage to become prime minister with a majority, which I think is extremely unlikely. I would completely discount that possibility. But we will see what happens. So that we have to look at. Then we have to look at all the events around Ukraine, the Paris negotiations with Zelensky. Zelensky and Putin are going to have a bilateral summit meeting, apparently, in Paris after all those after the full power discussions happen. So we'll see what comes from there. Then there's also separately, and it's not attracted very much attention, but it is important. There's a negotiation going on between Belarus and Russia about harmonizing their economies and seeking integration there too. So all sorts of things going on there. And of course, we have the nightmare of the impeachment in the United States, where there's going to be all sorts of important votes taken this week. I say important, that I don't consider any part of this thing serious. Important maybe, but not serious.
Okay, your dog is giving the
Yes,
signal
he's
for us to finish up. Sparky came through with one final super chat. I'm not sure what it means, Sparky. Kicked upstairs in US is F up, move up. So I'm not sure what that super chat means, but
it sounds interesting anyway.
I don't know if it's song lyric or something, but thank you very much. Sparky, Alexander Mercuris in London, thank you very much. Peter Lavelle in Moscow, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone that listened to this live chat and this live stream. We really, really appreciate everything you guys do for us. Great questions. Thanks for your support. Thanks for everything that you do. And we hope you have a very, very good day, morning, evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much, everybody. Please take care of yourselves and have a great week ahead. Thank you.